Kaigyong sect is the most mystical and powerful place on earth, home to the famed 10,000 Tibetan swords technique and the revered third prince of Shan, the greatest swordsman alive. The 10,000 Tibetan sword style was key to the hidden sword sect, where the third prince Shen now leads as the master of this reclusive martial group. At just 4, Prince Shan began practicing the sword. By 7, he had mastered the 10,000 Tibetan swords. At 11, he fought Taoist Yu, landing 185 strikes in moments, forcing surrender. People hailed him as a genius. At 14, he defeated top swordsman Zuo Tennyson with the magnificent 6 move of the ancient sword and earned the title Swordsman of the Abyss. A prodigy like no other, the prince reached heights in martial arts within a decade, even nearing the mythical immortal realm no one else could enter. As the uncle told these tales, one youth asked what he meant, but the uncle only said that if he explained it now, he might come to regret it. 9 months later, Shen dueled Mino, the top master of the demon sect, on Shirai Islands. "Have you heard of this?" the uncle asked. The children replied they knew Shen pierced the demon's throat with 100 strikes and became the top expert. Then the uncle added that Shen was struck by demonic chi during the duel, shattering 19 of his meridians. Though the prince survived, he lost all martial ability, an event seen as the greatest tragedy in martial arts history. Every 10 years, the gates of the Kaigyong sect open to recruit disciples. Crowds return, remembering the prince and lamenting his downfall. How could such misfortune befall Prince Shen? Many joined the sect, inspired by the legendary prince. A knight sat under the full moon, gazing at it with quiet sorrow in his eyes. A book slipped from his hand, its pages rustling softly in the wind as it lay on the ground. A kettle boiled, and the young man poured himself a drink. As he brought the bowl to his lips, he sensed another presence, an assassin nearby. He called out, telling the hidden figure in the trees to reveal themselves. Holding his bowl, he kept his eyes forward and spoke. Since September, an assassin had kept watch behind the mountain's white peak, always beneath the same tree. Tired of the pattern, the young man addressed the hidden figure. The masked stranger held a sword. Judging by their blade's aura, they had reached the 3rd level of the compassionate blade. Even Liu Ro hadn't reached level 7. The young man said with 10 years of training, the stranger could rival the best in martial arts. Hiding behind a tree, the youth listened as the prince spoke of power, gazing into his bowl as petals fell. The prince said it would be a shame if the youth died. If he left now, it would be as if nothing happened. After the prince spoke, the hidden youth vanished and reappeared right before him. With a sigh, the prince placed his bowl gently onto the table. He sensed the oncoming strike. The hidden youth leapt from the foliage, ready to attack. Sitting calmly, the prince reminded him he had offered mercy, but the youth still sought a fight. Was the prince's name truly that alluring? Our hero wondered this aloud. The attacker thought the prince a fraud and lunged. To him, broken meridians meant no kai. No matter one's sword skill, without kai it was meaningless. He believed that killing the prince would prove his strength once and for all. The prince briefly closed his eyes. In that moment, the attacker's sword shattered into fragments. Shocked, the youth heard the prince say his killing intent was too obvious. The compassionate blade's essence was to hide that urge. The prince admitted the sword had merit, but lacked a true spirit within. He added that a real killer conceals intent, even when lives are taken. The attacker stared, confused. How could a man with shattered meridians still fight? He couldn't believe the power he saw before him. Then the prince struck once, unleashing all his might. The youth was instantly torn apart, right before the prince's eyes. Still seated, the prince refilled his drink, lamenting the blood-soaked air. He knew it was time to leave this place. Rolling away in his chair, the prince murmured that it would have been better if the youth had come just a day later. In the valley below, the sun rose slowly over the mountain peaks. Its rays lit up a sword embedded at the summit's highest stone. In his carriage, the prince stared at the blade ahead. He held a drink in hand and poured it out. Lost in thought, he sat quietly with his memories. The prince heard footsteps. Someone had disturbed his peace. This was the forbidden backyard of the White Tower. Violators faced 3 months of meditation. Still, he noted that Miss Chu knew the rules, yet she broke them anyway. Emerging from behind the tree, she asked how he knew it was her. Smiling, scratching her head, she looked at the prince and walked straight toward him. The prince said if he were her, he wouldn't hide in such a creepy place. Someone might have even died here. The girl waved him off, saying he was teasing her more than usual. She opened a small box and proudly showed the prince cupcakes with pine nuts. urging him to eat them right away. Taking the box, the prince thought the treat looked great and had to taste even better. He picked one and took a bite as the girl eagerly watched, saying she'd spent hours making them. While he chewed, the girl mentioned her older sister had arrived at Chijian sect. The prince asked if they'd fought already, and she replied yes. As he had predicted, her sister came last night to test her. She used 5 sword forms but defeated Miss Chu in a single move, the Flaming Tai Chi. That sect is known for divine flaming art, a great dark technique. Flaming Tai Chi is its top defensive skill, drawing Chi energy to create a shield from the world's natural force. The prince said Miss Chu and her sister were both Shenhua sect heirs, but in martial training, the older clearly outshined the younger. He added Miss Chu lacked mastery in all 5 sword techniques. Even if she found her sister's weakness, she'd still lose due to lack of skill and experience. His words deeply hurt her. With tears in her eyes, she begged the prince to teach her a few sword moves to help her face her sister. The prince said her sword skills hadn't improved in 3 months, but her cooking had. If she gave martial arts the same dedication, she'd grow faster. Why be distracted, he asked while chewing a cookie. Miss Chu didn't see how cooking and martial arts were related. The prince told her he could no longer teach her. Without mastering basics, her moves would be rough. Her sister, who focused on one form, would beat her easily. Then she suggested he teach her the 10,000 Tibetan swords. If she learned that, maybe she wouldn't lose to her sister. She added that she had no interest in competing for Shenhua's heir seat. She only wanted to protect herself, and reminded the prince he should understand Shenhua's rules. That made him reflect in silence. The Shenhua sect has 2 heirs, sisters. At age 16, they must duel to the death. The victor becomes heir. The defeated is cast out. Both sisters belonged to this sect, and one now stood before the 3rd prince. Miss Chu couldn't understand such rules. Her progress was slow, and her sister posed a threat. So she came to train at Chijian sect using a token. She couldn't afford to lose. As he ate her cookies, the prince said that teaching the 10,000 Tibetan swords wasn't impossible. Hearing this, Miss Chu was overjoyed, but the prince had more to say. He added that the technique belonged to the sect. To learn it, she must join Chijian sect. But he didn't take disciples. Besides, the technique drains the soul, and overuse can drive one mad. Miss Chu listened and muttered it was just like Zhang said, just that. Her earlier enthusiasm faded. The prince quoted Zhang, saying that reaching the peak of martial arts meant nothing if one couldn't break into the immortal realm. This shocked the girl. He continued, noting her sect's mastery of the divine flaming art. Demonic sects had spirit teachings. Mad celestials had the dream shift technique. He named 7 or 8 methods with ease. She wondered if divine flaming art could truly be cultivated beyond ordinary limits. In Shenhua, only a few elders had ever reached level 9. Did the prince think her youth made her special? The prince mused that no one here had reached such heights. Martial arts demand constant progress. Without evolving, how could anyone surpass the past? The techniques he listed had the potential to reach the immortal realm, but only in theory. Someone must take the next step. Only by breaking the cocoon could one become a butterfly. This, he explained, was an old proverb. The girl said her head hurt, trying to understand it all, so he offered a simpler explanation. To reach the immortal realm, one must pass the martial abyss. With great energy, breaking through the moon eye leads to a higher level. The girl asked again, what did it mean to break through the moon eye? If it was the source of Kai, could martial arts be trained without it? If destroyed, then what? The prince recalled how ancient martial artists, wise and perceptive, used to meditate beneath the open moon. By breathing deeply, they transformed air into qi. That qi fortified the body, healed organs, and lengthened life. He added that focusing qi at one point boosts power greatly. In ancient martial arts, this method was essential. All of this, the prince said, came from the mystical moon eye. This was no exaggeration. The prince thought, this is what I want to say, but saying it aloud would only give the girl another headache. Just then, Miss Chu stood up, dazed, trying to grasp who she was and where she was. She told the prince to forget everything. She didn't want to dwell on it anymore. He should just teach her a few moves to survive. The prince saw she hadn't understood a word he'd said. It was clear she'd missed the point. The prince noted that someone else had arrived and interrupted their discussion. The girl turned her head, confused, trying to figure out who was approaching and whether they were from the sect. The prince clarified that this person had the same purpose as Miss Chu. He believed it was her elder sister. At that, Miss Chu froze in shock. She couldn't figure out how her sister knew where she had gone. The prince pointed off to the side and told her to look around. She hadn't realized she'd been followed. A silver thread trailed behind her, revealing she'd been tracked all along. As the prince had said before, at this moment, the younger sister had already surpassed the elder in some ways. From behind a tree, the elder sister, who had been watching silently, spoke, accusing Miss Chu of learning martial arts here. Then she walked toward them. She said her younger sister always stressed over small things, then added that using a sect token just to sneak away and train here was foolish. She accused her sister of running off to play on a forbidden mountain instead of serious training, and ordered her to come back before it was too late. The younger one responded she hadn't come lightly. She was here to ask the third prince to teach her swordsmanship. The elder scoffed and asked if those sloppy sword moves from last night were what she'd learned here. She then addressed the prince, saying even without demonstrating, just observing his movements should be enough to grasp the energy's flow, just like she had. With a single move, he could destroy the area. Was the younger sister truly blind to that? Did she really intend to give up? Did she care so little about her own life? Watching quietly, the prince saw that the older girl was indeed the sharp tongue of the sect. Her words had already shaken her sister. If Chu Huli took those words to heart, her confidence would be crushed before the next match, and she would certainly lose. The younger sister pushed back, saying once she mastered the prince's sword skills, it wouldn't be clear who'd win between them. A bit embarrassed, she looked away and told her sister that if she lost, it would only be because she wasn't strong enough. The elder replied that when her sister ran off to the Chijin sect, she knew something was off. She always believed the younger one had some special technique, but instead, she relied on a crippled man. She turned to the prince in his carriage. While he sat silently, the elder mocked him. Once the strongest swordsman, now too broken to stand. Was this really her sister's secret weapon? Still staring at him, the elder thought to herself that this man should have stayed down. Looking at her sister, she asked how she could be so disrespectful toward the prince. Then she added that her sister had changed. Just a year ago, she wouldn't even dare speak to the prince, let alone act this bold. But times were different now, and the younger asked why she couldn't speak freely, or even touch him. Ahead of them lay a cliff, and the younger sister didn't understand what her elder sister planned to do. Then the elder suddenly shoved the prince's chair forward, and the younger panicked, rushing to stop it. She cried out, telling her sister to stay away, ready to defend the prince using her own chi. The elder smirked and said her sword moves had already failed last night, and now she was using sect techniques. But with such shallow understanding, how did she even think she could stand a chance? The sisters clashed instantly. The younger felt the sheer force in her sister's palm. It was overwhelming. Still, she decided to counter it with her flame tai chi technique. Behind her sat the third prince. She had to shield him. She struck again and again, aiming at her sister. But every move she made was blocked. The prince watched with admiration. It was a sight to behold. The true strength of flame tai chi lies in its fusion of soul and thought. This girl had a quality her sister lacked, but she was still far too inexperienced. The elder looked at her sister and admitted Miss Chu was truly impressive. Still, she shouldn't have blamed her elder sister for what happened. Flames burst out as she attacked, but her tai chi was shattered. Her sister admitted her progress was real, but not enough. Attacking again, she coldly said goodbye to Miss Chu Li. The younger sister closed her eyes, accepting death, and her last thought was of the third prince standing before her. Then everything erupted in a flash. Amid the blast, the prince appeared between the elder and younger sisters. With tears in her eyes, the younger realized the prince had shielded her. He stood firmly in front of her, fully upright. Shocked, the elder sister instinctively stepped back. She wondered, how was Shen even able to stand? Were his meridians never truly broken? The energy radiating from him was overwhelming. The elder sister, lips trembling, bowed deeply to the prince and begged his forgiveness. She had only wanted to discipline her foolish sister. That was her reason for the fight. The younger girl wondered if Shen had truly retained his power all along. As the young man walked past her, he said if they were set on fighting, he wouldn't stop them. Then, snapping a branch from a tree, he added, it was one thing to spar, but disturbing him like this was crossing a line. His words shook the elder sister. She couldn't guess what the prince might do next, and fear crept in. Holding a branch, the prince seemed ready to strike. The girl froze, but he only sighed. His killing aura was still hard to suppress, and that realization struck him. In the Chi Giant sect, battles among disciples were common. So the prince told the sisters, if they wanted to settle things, the sect would decide who's stronger through an official match. Both girls silently pondered what lay ahead. Then the prince said the elder sister was free to go. The duel would happen in 3 months, and he gestured for her to leave. She bowed again, apologizing, then vanished swiftly. Watching her disappear, the prince silently noted her strength. Miss Chuli suddenly rushed toward the prince, exclaiming that he had recovered, but he casually dodged her. She slammed into a nearby tree, but didn't mind. She was too amazed by the fact that the third prince could now stand. The girl thought she must have lost her mind, risking herself to protect the top master. It was deeply embarrassing. The prince couldn't say for certain that he was fully healed. While working on his meridians, he had used the time to store sword chi for 8 months, but could only release killing chi. Chuli thought that without that, her sister could have seriously endangered them both. The third prince realized he still lacked combat experience, so he decided to let it go for now. But everything else would rest on her. He said her sister was likely still shocked. He told Miss Chuli to make good use of the next 3 months. Miss Chu was thrilled. She assumed the prince would now teach her sword chi. If she learned it, she imagined herself towering in power while her older sister knelt in defeat before her. The prince explained that if Chu could reach level 8 in flaming arts, unleash her chi fully, and take up the blade again, she'd have a 30% chance to succeed. Miss Chu was shocked it was so low. She reflected on the 8th martial level, needing to relearn chi from the start. A 30% chance seemed far too little to beat her sister. She voiced her doubts. She asked aloud if maybe she should just quit. Then her sister wouldn't pose any threat. The prince sat and asked why she was so convinced of that. He explained that someone like her sister wouldn't let her rest easy. She'd never leave loose ends. Miss Chu recalled her sister's words, blaming her for being gifted. So the prince said that in a life or death match, she must win with clear dominance, because people envy greatness, and jealousy can be deadly. If Chu survived this, she'd only be left to face her sister's cold gaze. Looking at Miss Chuli, the prince said he would officially begin teaching her martial arts. She was stunned he accepted her long-standing request. Abyss martial arts are built on 8 core pillars: defense, deception, strength, agility, skill, solitude, mastery, and awareness. In the Chijian sect, ranks fall under 3 main levels: heavenly, earthly, and mystical. The mystic rank is for beginners, anyone below the 6th martial level. Earth rank marks the core members. These fighters understand more than half the power behind the abyss. Heavenly rank includes all top 10 legendary masters, those at the peak of martial excellence. The third prince declared that from this day forward, he would officially train Miss Chu, adding that the 3 sect ranks welcome talents from all corners of the world. Upon hearing this, Miss Chu was shocked beyond belief. She felt like she was dreaming. The third prince had finally agreed to take her in. Her eyes sparkled as she stepped close to him, face nearly touching his. Only then did she realize how close she'd gotten and quickly turned away, flustered. The prince also noticed and told her she was standing too near. Embarrassed, she apologized and said she had gotten carried away with joy. The prince coughed and told her to focus. He would accept her as a student, but only for these 3 months, and only for training. No misunderstandings. He then asked her to report everything she knew about the current mystical rank standings within the sect. Miss Chu replied that Yu Wenji currently held the top spot in the mystical rank. Born into a martial family, he now trained under Changqing Palace. He also inherited 2 major martial bloodlines. Ranked among the top 4 young masters, he trained alongside the senior princess. He was now at the peak of level 6, nearly reaching the 7th. The prince thought to himself that it made perfect sense. He had heard that Yu Wenji would likely advance to Earth rank within the next year. If someone took his top spot before that, it would hit his pride hard. Hearing this, Miss Chu asked who was strong enough to do that. Who could possibly outrank him? The prince answered, it was her. Miss Chu was stunned and even hiccuped from surprise. She insisted that couldn't be. She was only at the 5th level. Miss Chu added that her grandmother said reaching level 6 takes 5 years. She was only 14 and level 6 was far too advanced for her. The prince said that by her age, he had already reached level 8. She looked away and asked him not to compare their progress. He reminded her that only by reaching level 7 could she hope to defeat her sister decisively. Looking aside, Miss Chu admitted he was right, but then she paused, realizing he had said 7th, not 6th. The prince confirmed it. He meant the 7th level. Miss Chu thought that reaching it in 3 months was simply impossible. He calmly said that it was just level 7. Miss Chu thought to herself, if her grandma heard this, she'd definitely faint on the spot. But since the words came from the third prince, maybe, just maybe, they could be true. The following morning, the temple was full of students diligently practicing martial techniques. A man seated in a chair remarked that the sect leader might be replaced this time, especially since his younger brother was seen as a strong contender. By all appearances, the young man had no trouble aiming for level 7. The man watching the student spoke to another youth nearby, thinking no heavenly master could match his third brother. Then, speaking directly to the man said he was simply feeling a bit discouraged and not to worry about it. Everyone owed the youth a debt, since he brought Yu Wenjin back. The Shu family in Shaking Palace lacked the strength and resources to help him grow. The man asked if Shu had been chosen to train at the Wall of 9 Affluent Dragons. The young man confirmed this, saying his father arranged it. If he remains in the sect for 10 more years, he stands a solid chance of reaching the 8th level. The younger brothers would be honored to hear such praise, the son said to his father. Then he was asked whether there had been word from his third brother, who was on the mountain's far side. The young man replied no news had come, so the elder said he'd visit him in 2 days and try to bring him back. Turning to Bai Li, the man complimented him on a job well done. To the young man, receiving praise from his father was a great honor. With the sunrise over the peaks, the prince sat alone near the swordstone, soaking in the stillness, until his brother disrupted the peace, spotting him by the carriage and becoming visibly emotional. He approached the third prince and said it was no surprise to see him here. Then, he shared that their father was concerned after hearing about the prince and asked if it was time to return to the sect. The prince, meeting his brother's eyes, thanked him but said he hadn't died just yet. Confused, the older brother smiled, not understanding why the third prince would say something like that. He added the injuries weren't life-threatening now. The prince clutched the chair in silence and said that Fujian, being the Lord's prized pupil, would eventually be mourned at Lanka Temple. The older brother would need to handle that duty. As the prince turned to leave, he said that if someone wished for his death so much, level 7 martial arts weren't the right way to get it. That kind of bloodshed was pointless. Just then he encountered Miss Chu running up to him, calling his name. The young man stepped forward. He completely ignored the girl, lost in thought, remembering that he too had reached the 7th level. Miss Chu arrived at that moment. She ran up to the prince and proudly declared she'd finished her run. The prince noted she must be tired. She admitted she was exhausted and mentioned meeting the elder prince, who looked far from pleased. She added that he looked like someone caught red-handed, like a child stealing winter rations. The prince replied that confessing to wrongdoing was never easy. Miss Chu agreed, then clarified she had never stolen anything and wondered why the third prince seemed unusually cheerful. Meanwhile, behind the mountain at the White Tower, Miss Chuli was in agony, realizing something was terribly wrong with the bath she was soaking in. Although it was meant to heal, the pain was unbearable. She splashed water everywhere, desperate to get out. Behind the screen, the prince calmly sipped his drink, hearing her scream that she couldn't endure the pain. He explained that internal organs are delicate, and this medicinal bath was designed to fortify them against full-body strain. Peeking from the screen, she cried that the pain was too intense. The prince said the herbs used were powerful to accelerate her transformation. He ordered her back into the bath, but she refused, crying. He then said she'd need to take this treatment every 3 days from now on. She was devastated. This was not what she had expected. After eventually finishing, she told the prince she was done bathing. She begged him to reduce the herbal dose. It was too painful. Covered in bruises, she pleaded, and the prince reluctantly agreed. However, he said she'd now have to gather firewood during her morning runs. She gladly accepted, bowing and saying anything was better than the bath. The next morning, in the bath again, she screamed that she felt even worse than before. The pain was overwhelming. The prince said the first bath had focused on nourishing her organs. The later ones, however, were meant to temper her bones, muscles, and tendons. He had even reduced the herbs, fearing she couldn't take it. Behind the screen and crying, Miss Chuli said she'd rather be killed by her sister than endure this torment. The prince, hearing her, asked if she truly meant that. Was she really ready to give up after coming so far to challenge her sister? After hearing that, Miss Chu remembered how she once tried to stop her sister from hurting the prince. She marveled at the prince. Everyone believed he was weakened, yet he surpassed them. It felt like he existed on an entirely different level. Realizing her skills were far too average to protect him, she knew she had to grow stronger to defeat her elder sister. But above all, she longed to become the prince's sword, his true defender. Lost in thought, Miss Chuli opened her eyes and realized she was lying in bed. She noticed she was no longer in the bath and had clothes on. Looking around, she wondered if she was in the third prince's room, and then glanced at what she was wearing. It hit her. She must have passed out earlier. She picked up the robe and realized she wore nothing underneath. It was the prince's robe. Seeing him in front of her while she sniffed his scent, she blushed in shock, realizing what she'd just done. Sitting nearby, the prince said if she was awake, she should change in the next room and prepare for training. He placed a bowl of rice on the table, her only snack after practice. Blushing, she thought she'd go change, but felt sure now she'd never be able to marry. The thought of him seeing her undressed made her heart pound. As she passed, the prince silently watched, thinking how pure and noble she seemed. He liked that about her. Dawn broke as she ran with a log strapped to her back. By evening, she completed another run as night fell. In the painful bath again, she endured the agony in silence. The prince quietly observed her progress. This routine continued for 3 full months. 3 months later, the prince watched her demonstrate her sword skills. He quietly admitted she had done fairly well over the months. At the main gate, he received a challenge letter and assumed it was from Miss Lai, but it turned out to be from her younger sister. At that moment, two seer approached and stood behind the prince, reading the note addressed from the younger girl. He scoffed, saying the little girl didn't know her limits. His companion then said perhaps they should honor Grandma Li's request and show mercy in battle. Watching her older brother, she sensed the young man was ready to break through, training on the wall of Ninth Effulgence dragons. To her, all these challenges seemed pointless. She turned to the elder brothers and said her younger sister was just impulsive. She apologized, but the young man told them to drop the act. They weren't as caring as they pretended to be. Seher looked at her sister and warned that no one wanted the young man to kill her. Everyone knew the harsh rules of their sex inheritance. He told her not to worry, but made it clear. Her sister disrupted his cultivation and he wouldn't hold back. Others might fear the sect, but he didn't. Throwing away the rice in his hand, he sat and accepted the challenge. He asked why his sister and older brother hadn't stopped it. This fight would injure the girl badly, possibly even cripple her. After hearing his words, they walked away from the wall, leaving him in silence. As dawn broke, Miss Chuli sat in the prince's home, gently combing his hair. She ran the comb through his long locks, carefully grooming him. Sunlight warmed them both as she finished. With the preparations done, she helped him into the chair and pushed it forward, cheerfully speaking about their future. The gates opened, and the prince saw his older brother smiling, asking if they were out for a stroll. The girl replied, laughing, that they almost were. The prince told his brother they were leaving the mountains. His brother was surprised. Was the prince really well enough to leave? Why so suddenly? Turning to him, he said it was that same young man who trained Chuli to fight. The man had gained fame and was nearly at the 7th level, yet she faced him anyway. Was the prince thinking clearly? The elder brother asked if he truly believed this was wise. The prince calmly said it would all become clear soon and stared into his brother's eyes. As he passed his older brother, the prince stopped to clarify something. He said he had the right to go wherever he pleased, and if his brother truly thought he could stop him, he was free to try. At that moment, the older brother realized he didn't have the strength to stop even his brother in a wheelchair. As they passed through the gates, leaving the brother behind, the prince said it was time to move forward. The girl nodded but saw her brother's expression, completely blank. Turning away, she told the prince she'd long sensed tension between him and the elder prince. Was he scared his brother might outshine him? The prince replied that every family has its own disputes. He added that she shouldn't dwell on that now. She needed to focus on the duel. Ju was highly skilled, and the girl had a soft nature. She could very well lose, the prince warned. She felt he didn't believe in her, but had already accepted that. He then said that if she lost, her older sister would never let her go. She replied firmly that losing wasn't an option. She had been taught by the third prince himself. Then she asked why the third prince never carried a sword anymore. He answered that he had no need for one. The forces of nature had become his sword's true essence. He said the mountains, the wind, snow, and all of nature now embodied his sword. He looked at her and added, she too was his sword. That's why he no longer needed to carry a blade. On the mountain there was a stone where his sword lay buried, a place he visited every day like a grave. The duel would take place in the arena. Everyone from the sect and temple gathered there. It was a huge arena, packed with people discussing the match. Brother Shu had mastered 11 destructive techniques. Many pitied the girl who dared to challenge such a fearsome opponent. The crowd hoped she could last a few strikes. Some joked they'd eat a stone if she won, while others laughed. How could she beat him? But still, she hadn't arrived. In the arena, Ju stood silently, gathering his energy. Some assumed she was too afraid to show up. Others said she should have just served a noble instead of embarrassing herself like this. Laughter broke out. Many thought she was too scared to face him. Just then, Miss Chuli burst through the doors and shouted, "Who says I'm scared?" Seeing her, Ju was secretly glad. He'd nearly lost hope she would show up. But behind her, the crowd gasped. Third Prince Shen had arrived too, riding in with her. He smiled, excited to watch his disciple battle Ju. The audience erupted. Third Prince Shen himself was here. No one expected him to leave the mountains. From the stands, the older sister stared in disbelief. He had come with her younger sister to witness and support her in this fight. Ju stared in disbelief. Was this real? Could it truly be Prince Shen standing there and not just a dream? A man tapped his shoulder, reminding him that Prince Shen was still crippled and didn't deserve that kind of reaction. Though Shen was once the top expert, his meridians were ruined. Now confined to a wheelchair, the crowd's excitement meant little. He couldn't affect the duel with mere presence. Shu's opponent was just a girl. Even backed by a legend, her strength was trivial. She was no real match for Shu. This was his big chance. The prince's brother said it was a rare moment to defeat Shen's student. Wasn't that a great opportunity? Ju listened in silence. Though Li's younger sister stood before him, he kept wondering who her backer was. Knowing it was once the world's #1 shocked him. Shu Li angrily declared the prince could crush him with one finger. How dare he insult Prince Shen? Shu turned to Chu Li and said, if he failed to win in 3 moves, he'd concede. Chu Li scoffed, saying he was too full of himself. She could easily withstand 3 moves. A man watching muttered what a sly plan that was. He noted that since the girl was Shen's disciple, Shu had placed her in a tough spot. Still, with such backing, she couldn't afford to lose. He watched as Shu stood ready for the fight. Others said Prince Shen would never agree to such terms. He was too proud, and even if he did, it wouldn't matter. To their shock, the prince agreed and said it was an excellent idea. He added that if the girl couldn't make Shu admit defeat within 3 moves, the win would go to Shu. The crowd gasped. Even if she trained under Shen, beating Shu in just 3 moves seemed impossible. Ju mocked that Shen must be foolish to think a girl could defeat him in 3 strikes. Chu Li replied she was Shen's student and would win, though her voice faltered. Someone turned to Shen and asked if he was truly confident about those 3 moves. The prince asked if she really thought 3 moves were too much and told her to stop talking nonsense. With no other option, Miss Chu Li prepared to fight. Shu drew his sword and mocked that Shen had lost his mind. Training her for just 3 months and expecting a win in 3 moves was absurd. Chu Li called him foolish and said he could insult her, but not the third prince. Speaking badly about him was unacceptable. Shu looked at her and replied, the winner is king, the loser, a thief. He'd judge her skill in battle. Chu Li gripped her sword hilt and drew it from the sheath. Shu felt a wave of destructive force as she launched her first attack. Seeing that he hadn't tracked her move, Chu Li turned to look at him. Shu was stunned by her speed. Where had she gotten such quickness? Her movements, her sword technique. This wasn't the same 15-year-old girl at the 5th level he'd imagined before. Shu realized she was far stronger now, and this fight wouldn't be so simple. After her strike injured him, he leaned on the floor, no longer so confident. Still, he told himself he couldn't lose to this girl and lunged forward again. The prince's elder brother couldn't believe what he saw. Prince Shen watched calmly from his chair, eyes fixed on Chu Li. As she charged, fire burned in her eyes. Zhu noticed it and feared her strength. Despite her power, he managed to block several attacks. He parried another strike, but was forced into close combat. Chu Li seized the chance and landed another hit. Her blow wounded him again, stunning everyone present. Yu stared at her in disbelief, horror written on his face. He dropped to his knees. The crowd was stunned. Had the great elder brother really lost to Chu Li? Where had this sword style come from? Had Shen taught it to her? Yu stood speechless, as shocked as the heroine's older sister and the prince's elder brother. They both shouted it couldn't be real and turned to him in disbelief. Chu Li overheard Zhu muttering that he couldn't possibly lose to her. She scoffed, asking him not to joke. Shu insisted he was just careless, and her flashy new move was no match for his swordsmanship, even if she was Shen's disciple. The young man had reached the 6th martial level. He simply couldn't lose to someone still on the 5th. He screamed in shock, horrified by his loss. The prince, disgusted, told Chu Li to end it. The elder brother never expected those words. Miss Chu smiled, nodded, and said she would finish the battle. But the young man shouted that he would be the one to end it. It couldn't end like this. His rage surged uncontrollably. He screamed for her to die and charged with another attack. The audience was stunned. It was a self-sacrifice move from the Shanky Palace. Sacrificing defense to unleash all chi in one blow. Was Shu really ready to die with Chu Li? A full-force level 6 strike. How could little sister Chu survive that? The crowd murmured as he attacked. Chu Li couldn't understand why he chose such a technique. Shu couldn't accept that someone at the 5th level could be stronger. How could she win? He thought someone like her should only surrender and walk away in shame. But when she looked at him, her gaze terrified him. He begged her to stop looking at him that way. Then he launched the suicidal move, aiming it directly at Chuli. The arena exploded with force. Her elder sister smiled quietly as she watched. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Shu. The crowd leaned forward, trying to see what remained after the blast. Then they saw Shu. He stood still, but blood spilled from his mouth. His sword snapped in two. He couldn't accept the loss. There stood Chuli, calm, still gripping her blade. And then Shu collapsed onto the arena floor. The crowd cried out. Had he really lost? It was unbelievable. Lying still, Shu didn't move. Chuli thanked him for relying only on brute force. Otherwise, she might have lost. She glanced at him, wondering if she had gone too far. The elder brother watching thought to himself, had Chuli somehow reached the 7th martial level already? But how could that be? It wasn't long ago that she had been only at the 5th level, yet Chuli stood proud as the elder brother realized the truth. She had truly beaten Shu using pure strength. No tricks, just raw power. It was clear now, her martial level must have been higher. Shu's sword shattered under her strike, and he lay on the ground, hands bleeding as he held the broken blade. She had reached the 7th level. As Shu spoke, a crowd gathered around Chuli, amazed she'd advanced 2 levels in just 3 months. Had the third prince really trained her? The elder brother couldn't stop thinking. Was the prince saying that even as a cripple, he could take an average girl and push her to level 7 that easily? Still stunned, he watched while the prince sat calmly, and the elder sister stood silently among the onlookers, observing. Chuli turned, surprised to see her elder sister there, and asked if she had come too. The girl didn't answer. Then, with a bitter expression, she asked if Chuli had truly reached the 7th level. Chuli confirmed it and said it was all thanks to the third prince. She was thrilled, yet slightly shy from all the attention. She admitted the prince wasn't pleased with her performance, confusing the audience. How could he not be? The elder sister stayed silent, and the prince replied that it was because Chuli still made many mistakes in practice. He said her sword intent today was still impure. When they returned to the sect, they'd repeat the training 1,000 times. Looking at her teacher, Chuli was horrified. Repeating it 1,000 times sounded unbearable. But, with tears in her eyes, she agreed. The elder brother watched from the side, then turned to the third prince, and asked if he had fully healed from his injuries. The prince looked at him and said not quite, but asked him not to worry. He had no interest in the things his elder brother cared about. His brother went quiet, then asked how it was possible to train someone so well in only 3 months. He meant Miss Chu. The elder brother added that the girl had already picked up nearly 20% of the prince's technique. It was a rare duel to witness. No doubt, only the third prince could train someone like her. She was far beyond others now. As the duel ended, the young man said that after hearing all this, he would return and find Chuli again. Excitement rippled through the crowd as they watched the prince depart with his disciple. Would he truly leave the mountain? And might they ever see him again? The elder brother stayed behind and, as the prince paused, asked if the sword hall had been tidied. Father appointed attendants to keep it spotless, the elder replied, since no one knows when you'll return. The prince nodded in approval. Watching them go, spectators whispered in disbelief. Today, they witnessed the prince in person, a rare privilege, and envied Miss Chu's apprenticeship under him. Father wandered the halls later, puzzled how his third son could appear publicly and remain hidden so long. He resolved to pay him a visit. The elder brother reminded him that Shen was reclusive in the city and unlikely to welcome an audience with his father. But he broke his silence today before so many students, Father said. I have every right to see him. He turned to his elder son. After all, I am his father. The elder brother remarked that the prince had likely favored his student, enabling her to defeat Shu in 3 moves. Father sat silently, anger brewing over his son's lingering injuries. Slumping into a chair, head in hands, he lamented that no cure had restored the prince's meridians. The elder son reminded their father that even divine healer Wu Sarang had failed. Shen remained wheelchair-bound, and they were powerless. This memory took him back to last year's palace uproar. Messages had circulated urgently for rushing water to his bedside. Then, everyone had hovered anxiously beside him, asking after his condition. Alas, several dozen meridians were irreparably harmed. Upon hearing this, Father's fury erupted. He seized the doctor by the collar. The elder brother intervened, urging their father to calm down and remember Wu Sarang could still be called upon. Softened, Father was urged to rest so they could help Shen however possible. Night fell, and as the doctor sat by the prince's bedside, the elder brother approached, apologizing for their father's outburst. His worry had gotten the better of him. The doctor reassured him that he was accustomed to their father's temperament and that all was under control. Outside, Father stood in the darkness, face buried in his hands, devastated by the ordeal. The doctor calmly said it was his duty, and he didn't blame the prince's father at all for reacting emotionally. He added that the third prince's wounds were grave, but he'd do his best. The elder prince thanked him sincerely. A quiet smile appeared on the elder prince's face. His brother's condition brought him inner relief. Grief loomed heavily, casting its shadow over the mountains. The doctor stepped out of the room. Everyone looked at him anxiously, waiting for news. He cleared his throat and said the prince's life was out of danger. Hearing that, the father felt some hope, but still watched the doctor closely, unsure. Then the doctor said that although the prince would live, he could never train again. The words left the father speechless and swaying. Overwhelmed, the father fainted. When he awoke, his eldest son was there, telling him he'd finally regained consciousness. As he opened his eyes, the father asked if what he'd heard about his son was true. The elder son explained that the third prince was stable and had been sent to the mountain to recover. He urged his father not to worry. The father sat quietly, face in hands. After a pause, the father told his son to go. He said the young man was free to do as he pleased. Seeing this, the elder brother realized there was nothing more he could do. He told his father to rest and quietly left the room. Sitting outside, sipping wine, the elder brother was full of anger. Why did everyone only speak about the third son? He was the eldest, yet his father barely noticed him. In frustration, he hurled the wine pot. His rage surged. His father cared only for the third prince, never him. He was the eldest. As the firstborn, he'd always trained hard, and eventually became head of the 4 martial laws. That title was all he had left. He was Shen Bailey. But lately he felt more like a servant than a prince. That thought ate away at him. While brooding alone in the forest, a chilling, echoing laugh broke the silence. Startled, he turned sharply and demanded, "Who's there?" Crows circled, moonlight glowing. As an eerie voice said, he'd always lived under his brother's shadow. Wasn't that true? Hearing the eerie voice, the young man demanded it show itself, as the sound echoed from every direction. Confused and alert, the prince scanned the area, but only silence followed, until the voice returned, speaking of the problems haunting him. In truth, the voice said, the young man had more than one issue burdening him. First, his father always praised the third son, his strength, his talent, while he, the elder, was merely a shadow. The voice said the father would rather pass the legacy to the younger son. The elder had climbed from novice to 7th level warrior, leading the martial lords, striving to rank among the top 10 strongest. The voice then drew near. In the flames stood a figure like a demon, asking why all eyes admired the third brother only. No matter how hard he tried, it felt impossible to surpass his younger sibling. Then the fiery stranger sneered. Was he content being just a servant to his brother? Filled with rage, the elder prince shouted for silence, drew his sword, and struck at the creature. But the voice returned, asking if this was truly the life the prince desired. Anger boiling, he shouted back, how could he be happy? He trained relentlessly without recognition. The fiery figure grinned, saying the young man had poured his soul into it. Shouldn't he take back what was his, even if it meant killing the third prince? What was his decision? The voice, dark, burning, whispered to slay his brother. And as the prince remained silent, his father elsewhere called his name but received no answer. Snapping back, the prince heard his father note how distracted he seemed. Bailey apologized and looked back at him. His father gently said that if Bailey was free, he was glad they could spend this time together. Bailey nodded and promised to visit St. Ken, and asked his father to care for the third brother, who needed him more than ever. Looking at the moon, the father replied that he had grown too old. Staring through the open window, the father spoke of the upcoming Wolf and Martial Masters Assembly. Mongolia would bring many gifted fighters. Bailey must prove himself. The prince bowed his head and quietly accepted his father's words. Then the father suddenly recalled what he meant to say. The prince noted that the gathering would coincide with his 16th birthday. They had to prepare well to honor their guests. Upon hearing that, Bailey said he would take his leave and exited his father's residence. As he stepped into the courtyard, the full moon cast its glow over the path the elder prince walked. In the moonlit shadows, he spotted a silhouette unknown to others, but unmistakable to him. It appeared without warning. The prince tossed something toward the figure, telling them to pass it on. Catching the item midair, the cloaked messenger nodded and vanished into the night, while the prince continued forward. Suddenly, red light flashed again and the voice returned, asking if he was ready for the upcoming Martial Masters Assembly. The young man ignored the question, not even turning his head. He didn't find it important. What mattered more was eliminating the third prince, who was quietly training on the mountain beneath the moon, unaware of the betrayal. Medic Fu arrived. Juyan from Juegong Mountain arrived. Rampaging swordsman Shui Tang came. Grandma Taiwo from the Xinhua sect appeared too. With so many experts arriving, others said there was no time to wait. They had to get to the sect quickly. Meeting them, the elder prince noted how many powerful figures had gathered, and a guest confirmed that the Qijian sect led all others. Even if the third prince could no longer fight, talent remained in the sect, including the prince and his father. Still, many believed it was best for the Qijian sect that the third prince lost his power. It meant no rivalry over the inheritance. People assumed the first prince felt relief, though someone nearby reminded them to watch what they said. Upon entering, everyone turned to the prince, noting what a grand occasion it was. 7 of the top 10 heavenly rank masters were present. Also present were sect leader Shen Shu, chief elder Fu, and hall leader Die Qinggong, who pledged loyalty to Qijian sect 3 years prior. The gathering promised to be eventful. The prince thanked everyone for their kind praise. Then someone leaned in close and whispered something into his ear. The prince nodded, said he already knew, and excused himself. He had to welcome Master LaRue and the righteous monk who had just arrived. The guests told the prince not to overexert himself. His father was aging and the third brother was weak. Now the full weight of leadership fell on him, and they all showed their deep respect. The young man replied humbly that he was only doing his duty. Just then, someone shouted, calling loudly for their teacher. The excitement was because today was such a rare and significant day. Dr. Fu's, swordsman Shui Tang, and even Grandma were present, Miss Chuli said. She heard that Master LaRue and the righteous monk were also on their way. It seemed every great master might appear. While she spoke, the prince asked if he hadn't told her not to call him teacher. He had only trained her for 3 months. The girl replied that it made no difference. Once a teacher, always a teacher. He had passed down his sword style to her, and that made him her master. The prince took a sip and said he hadn't truly taught her the sword. To him, she was as distant as the stars. Her expression grew irritated at that. Still, she insisted that she had expected the masters to gather, and it made sense. After all, it was also the birthday of the prince's father, the Qijian sect's leader. The prince said that was only part of it. The girl then asked if there were other reasons. The prince thought to himself, it should have already begun. Just then, someone interrupted, shouting for Prince Shen to come out. They insulted him, calling him a brat, and demanded to know how he dared kill their disciple. Again they yelled, asking how Shen dared to kill someone from their sect. The prince and his father turned to see who had spoken. Standing atop the sword statue was none other than Zhui Billy, head of the demonic sect. His presence stunned everyone. He wasn't invited. All the guests, including Monk LaRue, Qijian's mad scientist, Shang Shu, Supreme Elder Fu, Dai King, and others, turned their eyes to the intruder. The man stood tall on the statue and sneered, saying the top 10 heavenly rank elites had all gathered, and he looked down on them all. Shui Billy called it a grand assembly, but asked where Shenren was, since he was the only one he came for. The elder brother addressed him, saying he respected the demonic sect's leader, but entering uninvited and trying to kill his brother had crossed the line. His third brother hadn't left the sect since his injury by Mino. How could he be the killer? Shui Billy said he already knew everything and glared at the crowd. He claimed his disciple had been sent to assassinate Shenren, and all traces led right back to the giant sect. Shui Billy claimed that if not Shenren, then someone else from this sect had tried it. Shen's father eyed him with suspicion. No one could accept that Shui Billy, who wanted the third prince dead, was accusing them all. It was outrageous. He demanded the speaker reveal himself and began gathering energy in his palm to strike. The older brother responded that he knew Prince Duan had never come here. This had to be a misunderstanding. Shui Billy yelled, "How could it be a mistake? Did they think he accused them for fun?" He ordered them to bring out the third prince to settle things. Seeing this escalate, the father stepped in and said it was absurd, sending a killer after his son and then blaming them when it failed. Ridiculous. Shui Billy retorted that he only wanted justice for his disciple, an eye for an eye. Everyone was confused. It all sounded like nonsense. Turning to Shu, the elder brother said Billy should respect the occasion. It was their father's birthday. But he couldn't insult them all and expect no consequences. The prince's words carried force. His strength and leadership were obvious to all. Hearing this, his father turned to him, pride in his eyes. The intruder laughed and asked if they really wanted to start a war with his sect, one that would end in total bloodshed. Every wrong has a source, and every debt must be repaid, he said. At that moment, the third prince arrived and calmly said he was the one who killed the demon. His voice was icy, but he stayed composed, as always. Seeing him, Ju scoffed and said the prince had finally shown up, though he ignored his words completely. Everyone now saw Shenren. His father looked toward him. From inside the carriage, the older brother also gazed at Shen. The third prince declared that all present were witnesses. He alone was responsible for his past actions. Then he asked people to drop their hypocrisy. He asked aloud if anyone else wished to get involved. The crowd stood in silence, confused. Billy kept a close eye on the young man, waiting to see what he'd do. Shen addressed him directly. He said Billy alone wasn't enough to match him. The guests were stunned. How could someone still seated in a carriage challenge such a powerful foe? Billy focused his energy, saying he liked the prince's spirit. He leapt up, using body-strengthening arts, ready to strike. The prince countered with the force of the dragon's claw. As the man attacked, the father reached out, calling the third prince's name in alarm. The elder brother smiled quietly, recalling the past just before all of this unfolded. Back then, he had united with a fiery, human-like presence. It told him to kill his brother, but when the attempt failed, he was told to erase every trace. Still, he had a talent for deception, grinning at the thought. He subtly hinted to Billy that his disciples' last steps led to the giant sect. How clever. The elder prince stated his third brother would own up to his actions. Standing before top 3 heavenly rank masters, the youth shouldn't have been able to endure, the brother thought. If the boy didn't die, he'd still be gravely wounded, Bailey assumed smugly. Billy smirked, confident in victory, but underestimated the prince, seated and calm, who was far more than he seemed. Everyone stood stunned, father, elder brother, guests, all watching the duel and silently cheering for the young man. Without rising from his seat, the third prince defeated Billy, leaving the man speechless and disbelieving. Blood ran from Shu's mouth as he stood dazed. How could such a youth overpower him? The third prince simply smiled at Billy, who was left baffled. The elder brother, watching, was frozen in disbelief, unsure of what he was witnessing. Why was the boy unharmed? Why was he still alive? He thought about his third brother. The young man, still seated, calmly observed, having felled Billy with a single strike. When he made his move, he simply locked eyes with Shu. Billy was stunned. None of it made sense. The seated prince extended his hand toward Shu, who felt immense pressure overwhelm him. Under that force, Shu realized he was like an insect before the prince. The third prince's power was so overwhelming, yet he remained seated, hand raised, as Shu struggled not to panic or react. Terrified to move, Shu backed away, staring at the third prince still resting calmly in his carriage. The crowd couldn't believe Billy backed off, his retreat triggered by the prince's sheer aura. After a pause, the prince repeated, Shu alone was never enough to defeat him. Shu listened intently, hanging on every word. The prince seemed indifferent to Shu, glancing elsewhere, smiling, and speaking with calm ease. Still seated, the prince restated that Shu alone was no match for him. Hearing this, the elder brother stood stunned and speechless. Shu was among the top 3 heavenly rank fighters. Could he really be so weak? Had Shenren fully recovered? He looked stronger now. The third prince said they shouldn't be shocked. He'd had a whole year to heal since their last fight. He proudly stated that a year was enough time to recover and grow stronger. The elder brother couldn't accept it. Even if the youth had recovered, he still believed it wouldn't matter. He convinced himself the younger brother would surely die today. Nothing could stop it. After defeating Billy, the prince scanned the top 10 gathered before him. The young man invited them all to strike together. Why waste time with theatrics? The crowd stayed silent. The monk stepped forward, clutching his beads. He bowed and said the prince's power shook him, but he lived by peace. He asked when he had ever wronged the prince. He declared there was no bad blood between them. Was it possible the prince had gone too far? They'd heard the monk had fought a great evil spirit. Could he truly be well now? He'd never turn against the prince. Their bond was 300 years old. The prince assured the monk all was fine and said he no longer had the strength to wield his sword. With respect, the monk folded his hands and said he would continue to listen. Still seated, the prince looked around and asked if anyone else had something to say or dared challenge him. No time should be wasted. The father turned to the monk, unsure if the third prince was truthful or not. He added that the mad scientist had no strong student, and the old monk had little time left. Though he warned him, the monk was stubborn. The father followed him. How could he miss this? The third prince said all was well. 3 had come already. He praised Master Leroux's Buddha seal technique and noted that he and Jue could also guide the monk toward enlightenment. Still, after scanning the group, the prince remarked that their strength wasn't enough. A girl stepped forward, saying she hadn't planned to join the conflict. But seeing 2 more heavenly masters involved, she felt compelled. She asked if her Mountain Dew Gong had harmed the prince somehow. She added that the prince had slain Fujin. Master Leroux's gifted student, and others. Did he admit to such bloodshed? The prince answered coldly that he needn't recall every soul he'd taken. With sharp eyes, he stared at the girl. She said since he admitted to the killings, he must settle things with Masters Shui and Leroux. The prince said maybe she was right, but she lacked the strength to lecture him. She didn't understand his response, since all she meant was that the young man hadn't acted properly. Standing before the crowd, she asked the third prince if he realized his technique was unmatched. Still, out of respect for her dignity, she had no choice but to challenge him. Hearing her, the prince calmly said she would die in that case. Too young to die, his words echoed. The girl, thinking he was too arrogant, stared hard at him. As she met his gaze, she sensed the immense power burning behind his eyes. Realizing how strong he truly was, her body shook involuntarily. She clenched her teeth. How could there be such a vast difference in their strength? Her legs felt numb. She didn't even know if she was still standing. She struggled to breathe, as if falling into a void. Her mind slipped toward unconsciousness. Then Ju Young heard the word Amitabha, and her senses slowly returned. Drenched in sweat, she was visibly shaken. He said it was true. The third prince's power had reached divine levels. Only someone at such a height could wield a spiritual blade, said Master Laura. The prince looked at him thoughtfully when he mentioned being a witness. Laura listened but couldn't grasp it. It all sounded impossible. Chabili then asked if it was really so absurd, since the girl had just experienced it herself. Ju replied the old monk gave up too fast. The monk added they'd only seen the world from inside a well, and sounded rather dull saying it. He said universal law is singular. Everything that begins must eventually end. The young man smiled at the monk, saying even legendary heroes fade, and the third prince was no exception. The prince's father pleaded with the crowd, saying it was a mistake. His son had lost all martial skill. How could they still plan to fight a crippled child? Who among them would dare strike him? He then addressed the top 10 and turned to his son, asking if what they claimed was true. Bailey looked at his father, whose face was filled with dread. He told his father not to worry. He too felt something was off. Ju, standing nearby, shouted at Shen, asking if he was blind. How could someone weak force a heavenly master to kneel? Shen snapped at Jue to be silent. He knew what Jue was trying to provoke. Another elder stepped in, trying to calm the sect master. He said this was a matter for the third prince alone. But hearing Lao Lu's words enraged the father. How could he stay silent when his son was in danger? Lalu replied that he understood the father's deep bond with his son, but said the unjust killing of a top genius could spark chaos among the people. Still, he insisted on verifying something. Lalu had watched the prince grow from birth, though he also bore the duty of clearing the giant sect ruins. The prince told the elder that honesty with oneself and others was admirable. His father responded, saying Renner had provoked those standing before him. The father hated what was happening and believed his son was still disabled. Yet the group pressed toward the prince, telling him they'd kept him waiting long enough. The old man turned to the crowd, asking what they truly intended. Shen shouted, "Was this betrayal of their sect?" Bailey tried to calm him, saying Elder Lao stood for their sect's values and should be heard. His brother declared he believed in the third prince's innocence and urged others to open their eyes. The young man smirked. Perhaps he wouldn't even need to fight. If Shen Ren died, what was the point of ignoring the truth? He turned to face his enemies, counted 6, and asked if more wished to join. No one watching could guess what he planned. Then an old woman from the Shenhua sect stepped forward to speak. She praised Shenren's enduring courage, but asked if he truly grasped how many stood against him. The grandmother questioned his arrogance, saying her granddaughter merely repeated what she'd said about the prince, and it had gone far enough. Chuli rushed to the prince, asking if he was okay. Something felt wrong. She ran to reach the sect gate and finally spotted him. She saw the young man seated in his carriage, facing the 10 opponents before him. She didn't get why her grandmother disapproved of the prince, or why she didn't want her near him. Then her elder sister appeared in front of her and asked if Chuli really wanted the truth. Miss Chuli didn't understand the reason behind it all and wondered if it had something to do with the prince teaching her. She asked the crowd to wait. Was it wrong that the prince was teaching her swordsmanship? Was that against sect rules? The grandmother said that if that were true, then her granddaughter might have unintentionally caused the prince a lot of trouble. The prince disagreed and turned to the other masters, asking if they'd really stay silent. One elder said he held no grudge toward the prince. On his best day, he knew only 3 sword styles. Today, after 30 years of training, he wanted to show his progress, though he doubted he'd ever match the prince. The swordsman Zhu admitted the prince surpassed him. Still, he bore no hatred. He just wanted to see how big the gap between them was. The prince recognized he had another challenger. The prince added this calmly, while his father, disturbed by the events, called for it all to stop. Only old Fu stayed beside him, standing firm. Shen's father looked at Fu, questions heavy in his gaze. Seated before the crowd, the prince said everything was ready. Most had arrived, and they could begin. He had no objections. The prince only hoped his rivals wouldn't let him down. But then, old Fu stepped forward, surprising him. Seeing Fu step in, the prince's father was crushed. Fu said every family has struggles. The prince replied that he hadn't started this, so there was nothing more to say. He told Fu not to look so down. With the best heavenly masters present, he was ready for their challenge, and he meant it. The father, covering his face in shock, couldn't grasp how the world's greatest masters had all turned against his son. He looked at his son, Jenner, standing right before him, overwhelmed by what was happening. But all he could see was Jenner's back. Then, turning to his eldest son, he noticed Bailey's unsettling smile. The father didn't like Bailey's expression at all. Bailey, smirking, realized his plan was working. The 10 masters now stood against their target. The battle was moments away. Master Luo told the others this wouldn't be easy. Though it was their first united fight, forced cooperation wasn't needed. They all understood combat. Bailey said the usual codes didn't apply when it came to the third prince. Upon hearing this, the father cried out to his son, but the elder brother stopped him, reminding that they couldn't interfere with the internal affairs of the giant sect. The father was confused and didn't grasp what his son meant, but it was already too late. The battle began, and Master LaRue launched the first strike, insisting the son had been right all along. LaRue attacked swiftly, but the prince met it with calm resistance. Another master, tired of LaRue's lone action, joined the attack. Using shadow techniques, Zhou felt no less capable and also struck. He added dragon paw and body-enhancing techniques to his assault. The next fighter used the destructive palm style. Another added the healing technique and chi sword flow. Chico's grandmother used fiery tai chi to unleash the law of flame. One elder responded with boundless cold energy. Chi and Kagome unleashed the power of the blood blade together. Young launched divine body style. They all struck at once with the signature moves that made them legends. The prince, still seated, thought they moved too fast. He hadn't even had a moment to prepare. An explosion followed, and for a second, many believed the prince was finished. The young man looked toward the sun, now eclipsed by the moon. Closing his eyes, he sighed. This wasn't the challenge he hoped for. As he absorbed the blow, he turned his carriage away from it. His father, back facing him, shouted one last time, hoping to stop it. Chuli also cried out to the third prince. Tears welled up. She wanted to rush to help him, but she couldn't. Yet he seemed content with the chaos before him. All 10 masters who attacked from behind were now gravely wounded. His counterattack had struck them with incredible precision. They coughed blood, stunned by the technique's brutality, and left in shock at their defeat. The prince calmly turned to view the aftermath of his strike. His red glowing eyes radiated calm power, matching his composed expression. His father stood stunned, unable to believe Jenner was unscathed while the others lay injured. Bailey, frustrated, realized his plan had failed. The prince's single strike had left everyone broken, some unconscious, others missing limbs. The entire sect looked on, stunned. No one had expected such overwhelming power from him, not even his father. Kneeling, Monk LaRue admitted this display was worthy of the third prince. The path of martial arts was vast, even for them. He bowed, asking forgiveness for his harshness. His broken rosary lay on the ground beside him. Others muttered, astonished at how miserably they had been defeated. They couldn't believe the unmatched strength the third prince had shown. Were they really called heavenly warriors? One martial scientist approached the sect master and urged him to rise. Shu Tank laughed bitterly, looking down at his own wounded body. His sword had shattered, his hands bleeding and cut. He could no longer hold it and let it fall. With clenched fist, the prince spoke of the divine realm. Staring at the prince's back, Changxing now saw the immense gap that had always existed between them. It was clear. The third prince had outgrown the need for a sword. The young man nearby, badly hurt, tried to stand. The prince, silent at first, recalled the talk of the godly realm. Is that so? He asked aloud, then answered himself. It was still far away. This power was only a fraction of something even the masters had never encountered. The prince stared ahead, his eyes cold. Some opponents had only been lightly hurt, but many others had suffered serious, disfiguring wounds. He noticed Master Man of Di Qigong Hall lying defeated at the blade's edge. He said it was a shame. Such a skilled, bloody blade master lost to one of his own strikes. The prince told Qui-Gon that he had, in the end, chosen betrayal by turning against the giant sect. He added they should have replaced him sooner. His father was stunned to hear this. The prince then turned to Elder Lao, saying this was simply the sect's rule. He looked at Lao again and noted it didn't matter anymore. After all, Lao had lost an arm fighting him. Still staring at him, the prince asked if Lao had any objections. The elder gave no reply at first, then admitted he had no complaints toward the prince. The prince next addressed Master Shui. He said the demonic sect treated blood and hearts as tools, and now he wished to see Shu Billy properly married. He also ordered his students to stop causing trouble from this point on. Then he turned to Master Chief Yu, saying though she had no major deeds for the sect, she had shown respect. He would return it in kind. She confessed she had grown old and weak, never expecting the third prince's power. She was ashamed of her own limits. But when she saw the prince's invisible blade, she realized how far she still was from true mastery. Next to her sat Dr. Fu. The prince turned toward him, reminding him that a year ago, Fu helped him and lost much strength. The prince knew it wasn't his fault, but he shouldn't forget such devastating techniques. He added that Fu was the only divine healer. When Fu healed others, there was always joy in his eyes. Fu bowed in gratitude, moved by the prince's kind words. Then came Yang, staring down at the ground. The prince said this part was about her. He told her to rise. She had dared to fight him, risking death. And he was impressed. He said today was a good day, and so he forgave her. She accepted. Last, the prince glanced back and asked what Bailey had to say for himself. Bailey replied, pretending to be supportive, saying he was his brother and glad for him. Though it wasn't true. Inside, he was furious, but admitted aloud that his younger brother had shown strength enough to keep the world afraid of him for a long time. The third prince told his brother to stop pretending. They were still brothers, and he didn't want to kill him. So he asked Bailey to take his own life. He repeated that his older brother should handle it himself. Murmurs spread through the sect. Was Prince Bailey really being told to end his life? No one had expected such a harsh end between brothers. Many said it would bring disgrace to the Saxons. Some asked if Shen was serious. Perhaps it was a cruel joke. Others called him bloodthirsty, claiming Bailey had always cared for him. The prince just sat silently as everyone speculated. Their father turned to Bailey, but Bailey stood wordless, not even looking up. The father, speechless himself, didn't know how to respond. Then the old woman finally spoke, saying Shen had been truly worried. She said time had changed the world and the brothers' bond had hit a wall. Better to let them resolve it themselves. The third prince agreed, saying the world keeps shifting. But people don't. Only hatred and killing remain, and he was tired of watching it all. Closing his eyes, the prince said his brother could choose for himself. Everyone fell silent. Only the wind stirred as all eyes turned to Bailey, waiting. Bailey then laughed, loud and bitter. He hadn't expected the so-called heavenly masters to be so weak. He mocked them and said this was exactly what he needed. Then he looked at his brother and said he never imagined he'd be seen as just another failure like the other masters. At that point, he summoned something that had always been by his side. No one expected Bailey to attack the third prince. The old woman said the flame that appeared was strange. It radiated something unnatural. In the past, under moonlight, that same presence had thrown a scroll to Bailey. It told him that when defeat was near, he should use this hidden technique. Bailey caught the scroll. He asked what he must give in return. The presence replied he'd learn the price when the time came. Now, facing his brother in battle, Bailey chose to use that very technique. The fire gave the elder brother something strange. Everyone sensed its power. It burned intensely. From the flames, his body took shape as people watched in awe, trying to grasp what was unfolding. The younger prince sat still, watching ahead. What would happen next? From the fire, a strange figure emerged. Legs, then arms, and then it laughed. Finally, its face appeared, mocking the boy's past choices. Could heavenly masters truly be this weak? It taunted. The gray-haired man stood before the third prince. Bailey asked if Shen dared to face this man, saying he couldn't be blamed for having reached his limits. It was something he had to accept. Everyone stared at the old man in front of the 10 remaining masters. A few recognized him, Master Wu Jiang, also known as Wu Giant, or the Five-Blade Swordsman. Every 60 years, he left seclusion to battle the strongest. His first opponent was the top master then, Shu and Wu. After a brutal fight, Wu Giant won and sealed him into his sword. Next, he defeated Yangzi, the wielder of the Sword of Chaos. Then he beat the Dugu clan head and claimed his rapier. He also vanquished Emperor Xinjiang and took the Rift Sword. Lastly, 63 years ago, he overpowered the demonic cult leader and seized the 10,000 poison sword. These 5 sword masters fell to Wu Giant, who became the bearer of the 5 legendary swords, a legacy told for generations. No one knows who he'll fight next. Rumor says he surpassed all 9 levels of cultivation and became one of the world's strongest. Wu Giant, a terrifying demon, carries the blood of the mightiest. LaRue, staring at him, said the rumors were true. Wu Giant and the third prince had exceeded the 9th level of martial cultivation. But just how powerful was Wu Giant? Many were unsure. Even sect disciples couldn't comprehend his strength. They'd heard tales passed down for years, yet still couldn't grasp his true power. As Bailey looked at Wu Giant, he started to bleed. The third prince observed it all without emotion. All eyes followed Wu Giant. After 60 years, he had returned. Sect disciples who looked at him suddenly began coughing blood. None knew why, until they realized it was just from his gaze. Looking at them, Wu Jian scoffed and said he was merely a grandpa out for a stroll. This wasn't a place for weaklings. Laughing, the old man said that wasn't the point. He was just out for fun and asked if anyone would entertain him. When he saw Bailey, he realized that if he'd been summoned now, then his plan had clearly failed. He asked the prince if that was the case, then remarked that such a result was expected. These heavenly masters couldn't compare to his brother. Turning away, Wu Giant saw the third prince still seated in the carriage and stared at him. He burst into laughter, saying this was the perfect moment. He'd been bored for too long. His grin twisted into madness. He wondered aloud whether the boy might reach the godlike realm. Bailey froze when he heard that word. He was stunned that Wu Giant was referring to his own brother. Even the watching disciples were in disbelief. Had Wu Giant truly mentioned the godlike realm, a level above the 9th? The prince met Wu Jin's eyes and said he had no need to prove anything to anyone. All the remaining masters lowered their heads, sensing what was about to happen. The father also called out to Shandor, telling him to listen, but Bailey was too furious to accept what was unfolding. Wu Jin, pleased, said that was just fine. He loved powerful opponents. Even if the youth resisted, they still had to determine who truly deserved the title of strongest. Wu Giant turned to the third prince. Looking at him, he spoke of the 9 stages of martial development. He had long surpassed them. The 5 orbs he possessed gave him power beyond those levels, and would let him step into the godlike martial realm. He told the prince not to let him down. The young man didn't reply and remained silent. The sect's disciples still couldn't grasp Wu Jian's meaning. Had he truly surpassed all 9 levels? They stared at him in disbelief. After a pause, the prince said gaining strength by taking lives was a dark path, and he would not walk it. He warned Wu Giant to leave now, or he would be destroyed. Wu Giant stared back and told the prince not to get cocky. He summoned his flames and launched an attack on the young man. But the prince didn't react. He sat calmly, staring ahead. Once the attack passed, the prince remarked that after 300 years of training, Wu Giant should have become far more terrifying. But he didn't match the image the prince had imagined. Grinning, Wu Giant said not to rush to judge. He'd only used a fraction of his chi. The prince hadn't yet seen his true sword technique. The third prince replied that he already knew the limits of that sword technique. He added that his spirit didn't meet its demands. If he misused it, he could lose the world he longed for. Wu Cheng replied that it was all quite tragic, and once more became a blazing sphere, returning to his former fiery self, and pushed forward with full strength. He laughed, thinking he'd never uncovered the secret of the 10,000 Tibetan balls. So he asked the prince to let him learn a little more. He told him to face him in his real form and activated his blood transformation. Worth far more than the prince's cheap one, Wu Jian claimed. Suddenly, something lit up right before them all. Everyone looked skyward, including the hero himself, who stared at the light shining ahead. Leaving Wu Jiang behind, he announced he'd return the next day to claim the prince's life. At that moment, the prince stood atop the sword statue, fending off the attack. That same statue where Zui Billy once stood when he arrived at the sect. The students now saw the prince wasn't seated but towering on the sword statue, gazing skyward. Meanwhile, far below in a dungeon where no sunlight reached and only torchlight flickered, a large castle sealed the cell. The father and Master LaRue walked the corridor toward the dungeon. Once there, the father shouted to wake his shackled son. Bailey, bloody and broken, told him he was wrong and begged for release. Still pleading, he looked at his father through the iron bars. His father asked where Bailey had met the sword-killing master and demanded to know the man's location. Bailey replied the man was too elusive. Even if he knew, what could they possibly do to someone like Mr. L'Oreal? Seething, the father said that even 1,000 years wouldn't be enough for Bailey to atone. Bailey only laughed in reply. Staring at his father, Bailey said that despite everything, he still defended the third prince, while his own son sat imprisoned. His father's face twisted with frustration. Then Master Liu reminded Mr. Shen to stay focused on their main goal. He added that he never truly understood his eldest son, but that wasn't the issue now. Master Wu Yong never resisted them. From the day he arrived at the Masters' Gathering, where the top-ranked warriors met, Bailey remained a mystery. They hoped he'd finally speak the full truth. Monk LaRue turned to Prince Bailey and said he shouldn't have kept the truth hidden. The prince, silent and staring ahead, heard LaRue say he still had a chance to redeem himself and choose the right path. Upon hearing of redemption, the prince asked again if the monk truly believed that path was still open. He questioned how atonement was possible. He had no martial ability left, and Shenren wanted him dead. Father and Master Liu said nothing, only watching in silence. Just then, Miss Chu Li dragged her brush across the canvas but couldn't understand what her painting was revealing. Turning to the prince, she asked if he was troubled by recent events. He replied with a question, should he be? She reminded him Wu Giant had tried to kill him. She picked up another brush, and as the young man listened quietly, she added that Wu Giant was over 300 years old. Wasn't that concerning? The prince stayed focused on his painting, saying Wu Giant had never faced a true rival. Had he met his ancestors at age 60, he wouldn't have lasted. His sketches filled the canvas, and Mr. Li remarked that if the Shen family was stronger than Wu Giant, their ancestors must have been terrifying. Miss Chu imagined Prince Shen and his forebears. Then suddenly she began to cough. He asked what was on her mind. She told him not to worry and wiped her mouth. She said that even if she'd only trained for 30 years, the prince was still strong despite being younger than Wu Giant. The third prince held up his drawing and said Wu Giant might claim godlike power, but he had barely touched its border. Surprised, Miss Chulai asked if he meant the moon eye within that realm. He nodded, referencing their first lesson. He once told her the moon represented the 10th realm, also called the chi of the moonblade. Picking up his brushes, he added that he was still far from reaching it. Miss Chuli was stunned. How could he still be far from it? Though her mind could barely keep up, she kept wondering about the realm the prince now approached. Turning to the teacher, she asked again. He answered that Miss Chu wasn't ready to learn about that realm yet. She then asked what had happened to Wu Jian. The third prince explained that Wu Giant had traded some of his blood for power, and his true stage was now uncertain. Still, he deeply wished to face that opponent with his full strength. Gazing ahead, the third prince spoke. Seeing his look, Miss Chuli realized this was the same prince she knew, unbothered by his enemy's power. But suddenly she wondered, what did full strength really mean? Recalling their fight, she realized the prince hadn't used his full power. Why would he hold back? She said the old monster might be hiding something. Wasn't that a serious threat? Just then, the prince pressed a seal onto his nearly finished painting. Chuli wondered what secrets Wu Jian might be concealing. The father gathered everyone. He announced that tomorrow would be a crucial day. Master Lu added that over 23 heavenly masters had already died by Wu Giant's hand. He said the martial world would never be the same again. This demon grew stronger by absorbing the blood of powerful foes. After killing 5 top masters, he rose to a higher level. Chuli's grandmother feared only the third prince might stand a chance. The father and others began to wonder, could the third prince truly defeat Wu Giant? Nobody knew. They'd asked the prince often, but he stayed silent. The father felt he'd failed as a parent, unable to reach his son. Master LaRue, seeing his despair, told him not to blame himself. He gathered his thoughts and said he too had misjudged the whole situation. Thinking about Wu Jian, he realized everything would change tomorrow. Master Wu Giant was coming to the sect. Was the prince prepared to kill him? None doubted the prince's strength. Still, Miss Chuli felt uneasy. She called Kuo and told him to stay alert. They had to protect the city. Looking forward, she saw a grand festival, glowing lights, and joyful crowds. As the prince passed by in his chair, Chuli asked if he wanted to fight Wu Giant in the mountains and share the region's spirit. He said no. The real concern was the fight's impact on the city and mountain. Chuli didn't quite understand and asked what he meant. The prince said they should stop here. Behind him stood a master shaping few symbols, and the restaurant around them was completely empty. The prince rolled up to the table, and Miss Chuli noted there were barely any guests inside the restaurant. The young man said too much attention was unnecessary and casually asked the waiter for a baked egg and strong Chinese liquor. Miss Chuli admitted that after all that had happened, she couldn't bring herself to eat. The waiter asked if she wanted to order anything, but she replied she couldn't eat after 6. He smiled, saying someone as lovely as her didn't need to worry about eating late. She thanked him for the kind words. She then turned to her teacher seated nearby and asked what the prince truly meant earlier about the city and the people's fate. Just then, the waiter brought food to the table, wishing the prince a good meal. Miss Chuli asked, "What did you mean before, Chen?" The prince picked up the egg with chopsticks and replied that his answer might surprise her. He added that no matter how the fight ended tomorrow, something would inevitably change. Looking at her, he took a bite. Miss Chuli, clearly nervous, urged the prince to get some rest before the battle. Pouring himself a glass, the prince said a little drink wouldn't hurt in that case. Was that so? Turning to the waiter who had brought food and drinks, the prince asked who the man next to him was. The man wiping the tables, wearing a robe and bandage, lowered a knife and removed the bandage. He said it wasn't bad for someone from the Shen bloodline. Standing before the prince was Wu Giant himself, right there in the same restaurant. Miss Chuli instinctively jumped in front of the prince to shield him, shocked by Wu Giant's presence, and asked why he was even there. The prince, still seated, told her not to worry, but she couldn't understand why he remained so calm. Wu Giant said there would be no fight today, so he wouldn't attack. Standing before the prince, Mr. Li asked how the young man knew it had been Wu Giant all along. The prince replied that he had sensed his energy in the air earlier while holding his bowl. He stared at Wu Giant and asked why someone so powerful would be waiting here in a place like this. It didn't make sense. Indeed, Wu Giant had been in that restaurant the whole time, waiting for them. Mr. Li remained by the third prince's side, ready to shield him from any threat, as Wu Giant walked past them. Wu Jin said there was no need to overthink it. He added he was merely walking by, calling the prince quite the odd one. He then sat down and asked why the prince came here, looking between the young man and the girl in silence. The prince replied he only came to share a drink, with no other intentions. Glancing at Wu Giant's bowl, he noted the man had trained with the sword for 276 years, and should avoid alcohol due to the blood-devouring technique. The prince added that method had serious flaws, turning Wu Giant into a cold, corpse-like being, and pleasures like drinking were forbidden to him. Wu Giant replied that despite the limits, the technique granted tremendous strength, but the prince said it took too long to master. The prince stated that after 500 years of cultivation, Wu Giant might be able to slice the moon. He looked at the old man and said that even after 200 years of practice, Wu Giant might still struggle to reach that level. Mr. Wu Giant asked if the prince was planning to delay their fight. The prince said that stalling would only work against the old man. Within a year, he'd be too strong to match. Wu Giant knew this and insisted they fight during tomorrow's full moon. The prince stayed calm, holding his bowl, and asked if the old man would really agree to delay the duel, even if he offered. Wu Giant asked what would change, and the prince said things would go exactly as stated. He just wanted to share a peaceful drink that evening and slid a bowl toward Wu Giant. He tossed it right into Wu Giant's hands. Wu Jin caught it instantly and said he wouldn't drink. Shenren tilted the bowl and asked why the old man refused the drink so stubbornly. After finishing his own drink, the prince asked if their final moment would truly come tomorrow. He drank slowly, set the bowl down, and both men understood that the duel was set for the next day. After drinking, the prince told the girl it was time to return. She agreed, and they left together. Meanwhile, the old man, Wu Gyong, sat silently staring at the bowls before him. One cracked. The prince turned to him and calmly said their final battle would come tomorrow. The mountain temple stood above, where the prince had taken his seat. Hands clasped, he quietly spoke of the coming event. Moonlight poured down, yet the prince wasn't alone. He stood with his allies, including Miss Chu Li. Everyone awaited the monster's arrival. The full moon duel was drawing near, and Wu Giant had yet to appear. Though many believed the third prince would win, including Miss Chu Li, he himself had doubts about the outcome. She looked at him and saw that everyone else was watching him too. A wind stirred the moon gate, and Master Lu whispered that Wu Giant had arrived. A red glow lit the water's surface as Wu Jian walked across it. Eyes widened as someone explained he was floating by, sustaining his energy. The monster's power stunned them all. Suddenly, Wu Giant leapt past the crowd, his speed leaving mouths agape. He landed near the prince, who had already sensed his presence. It was no surprise. His use of the blood-devouring art was unmatched. The prince acknowledged Wu Giant's formidable potential. Though the technique extended life and boosted energy, its chaotic nature could eventually destroy the user's body and mind, the prince warned. Wu Jin admitted he never planned to stop. Life without power didn't appeal to him. Turning to the prince, he asked if someone like him, an expert of the higher realms, thought about the price of practicing a forbidden blood technique. Did he ever consider the taboo? Grinning, Wu Giant asked what the prince thought. He himself had no concerns and dismissed such thoughts as foolish. He then glanced at the older men who wanted him dead just minutes ago, Master Laura and Chen's father among them. Confused, Wu Jin lifted 2 fingers to channel his full power and declared that strength was all that mattered, then launched his attack at the prince. The third prince remained seated, unmoving, watching the speed of the incoming strike. Everyone around believed the attack was incredibly fast, until an explosion erupted right in front of the prince. The old man looked up and saw the third prince already high in the sky. He recognized the technique. It was an ancient levitation method. The prince rose lightly into the air. Wanting to match him, the old man leapt up, wondering how the prince looked from that height. The prince answered calmly, saying he was free to think what he wanted. Wu Jint agreed silently, but still questioned how someone like the third prince could be born in such a place. Realizing their shared origins, Wu Giant knew he couldn't restrain himself and had to fight at full strength. The prince confirmed this, saying Wu Giant had no choice but to go all out, and in response, Wu Giant unleashed her energy to strike. Below, all eyes were fixed on the prince, especially Miss Tuli, who clutched her chest in worry, concerned about the prince facing such a fierce opponent. The third prince and Wu Giant floated in the air, facing off. Wu Jin began attacking with martial techniques. The prince quickly dodged. The prince then landed on a rooftop. Wu Giant acknowledged he deserved his title. Though he'd used two powerful attacks, the opponent before him was truly formidable. Standing close to the prince, Wu Giant thought he wasn't as arrogant as expected, and wondered how long the youth could endure. The prince met his gaze calmly, unfazed. As Wu Jin attacked again, the prince countered with elemental defense. Spectators could sense the overwhelming sword intent. They knew they'd only hinder the fight and couldn't understand how the prince's meridians endured. A divine healer nearby confirmed what they saw was real. He explained that restoring damaged meridians was extremely difficult. He feared the prince was burning through spiritual energy just to stay upright. Still, the young hero continued battling the elder. Though his body was slightly injured, he fought on. Wu Jin declared he would not hold back in this fight. His next move removed all remaining restraints. The prince saw it happen and acknowledged the power. It wasn't bad. Then Wu Giant prepared to show the prince another technique. Raising one finger, he unleashed an illusory blade. Those watching recognized it immediately. It was Master Guan Wu's phantom sword. The youth parried the strike with ease. The force of the blow shattered the entire tower. Spectators realized even the spiritual white tower couldn't withstand that force. What kind of power were they witnessing? Wu Jin was amused the prince hid his sword so long. He then charged, unleashing Master Guan Wu's sword style. Wu Jin was a man driven by the thirst for power. But those moves were mere shadows of his own original style. The prince deflected each strike with composure, saying the blood-devouring method was remarkable. But in the end, it was still just a technique. Wu Jin refused to stop, claiming he hadn't shown everything yet. He raised his sword, using the horse-to-blade style, and launched a flurry of savage slashes at the prince. The prince dodged gracefully, but didn't notice when Wu Giant suddenly appeared behind him. The young man found himself trapped in a glowing net within a circle of binding energy. Yet, as the prince had predicted, it turned out to be an illusion. Breaking free, he tore through the bindings with ease. Shocked, Wu Giant watched as the prince gripped his sword and prepared to counter. Wu Jin thought the youth's arrogance was unbearable. He summoned his blade domain and attacked again with the cherry blossom dance technique. The prince acknowledged it was a fine move, perfect for targeting a single opponent. But tossing the sword aside shocked everyone watching. Even the old man hadn't expected such a bold gesture. The blade flew straight into Wu Giant's hand. Wu Giant caught it and asked why the youth had been so arrogant until now. He demanded why the third prince refused to use his own sword. Irritated, he powered up to end the duel, but the prince just watched in silence. The prince knew that still wasn't enough. Wu Giant warned him not to take his strength lightly as he now used the Void Art lightning stream to launch a direct high-speed strike. The prince raised his hand, trying to block the powerful blow, but the blade nicked his hand, drawing blood. Miss Tuli saw the bleeding and asked if the prince was hurt. He switched to his uninjured hand and countered Wu Giant's strikes with it. Wushang noticed the wound and asked what had happened. Despite rumors of weakness, the prince had only a minor injury, yet still stared at his hand. He declared that fate would be sealed today. He must slay Wu Giant for the sake of the 9 abysses. Staring at his palm, the prince whispered that Wu Jing must vanish today. Wu Chang fell silent upon hearing that, then burst into a loud, mocking laugh. He mocked the prince's resolve, calling him naive and uncaring for the fate of the worthless masses. All that remained, he said, was to defeat the third prince and be remembered forever. He drew the fifth blade, declaring his thirst had gone unquenched for 2 centuries. He asked if the prince was ready to entertain him in battle. The youth only smiled as the fifth blade was aimed at him. Wu Jin unleashed a level 10 technique, Poison Dragon. The divine healer warned everyone, especially the prince, to avoid the deadly gas. But the prince was unaffected. Wu Giant tested the poison anyway. He launched an attack, while the prince stood within the toxic cocoon. Wu Giant complained that the poison couldn't corrode the prince's spiritual barrier. The prince told him not to worry about it. Then a massive explosion occurred. The prince emerged from the toxic shroud unscathed. Spectators were confused. Did the third prince just use a weapon? Chuli's grandmother explained it wasn't a weapon. It was a piece of the prince's torn cloak. No one could grasp how he turned a cloak fragment into a weapon. Wu Giant admitted it was impressive, blocking and retaliating using only his cloak. The prince's father realized this technique was the 10,000 hidden swords strike. He had already raised the issue the day before. The prince asked why it hadn't been resolved yet, adding that nothing Wu Giant had used was enough. Did he have anything left? If not, the prince warned, Wu Giant would fall. The old man laughed loudly upon hearing this. He stared at the youth clutching torn cloth, recalling that at 17 he reached martial level 10, and with more time, he could have been a top martial lord. But fate had him cross paths with this young prince. He said he had trained for centuries and couldn't back down now. Calling forth his 5 swords, he declared it was time for a true attack. Everyone, including the prince, watched intently as the old man began his move. Wu Jin started swallowing the swords one after another. At first no one understood, then it became clear. He was consuming the swords. It was absorption, amplifying his power. Could this be a new martial realm? His energy continued rising. Each devoured sword made him even stronger, and all could see it, especially the prince. Now he appeared as a blazing sphere, no longer human, more like a fiery being. His burning gaze fixed on the prince as he laughed maniacally. He mocked the motionless prince and demanded he stop hiding behind scraps of cloth. With the moon risen, he urged the prince to show his true strength. The prince studied him calmly, recognizing the sword soul absorption technique. He sensed Wu Giant's immense rise in power. One attack came so fast the youth barely avoided it. Everyone's attention locked on Wu Giant's form. The crowd feared what might come next. No one could predict it. Wu Giant launched an assault at Shenzhen, and everyone thought the prince was gone, lost in the strange glowing sphere. No one knew if it was over, until Chulai's Avenger said the prince would never lose. Just then, Wu Giant sensed something was wrong. He saw the youth again. The young man struck from behind using just 2 fingers. The third prince landed a direct hit on the old man. Wu Giant felt the immense force behind that strike. The prince asked if the technique that restores power so fast also risked causing mental collapse. He said the sword soul absorption technique boosts one's energy, but Wu Giant no longer looked human. It prevents the user from unlocking their full potential, the prince told Wu Jian. The youth raised the sword skyward with 2 fingers, wondering if it could split the moon. The old man laughed, amused, and launched a sudden attack. Their battle resumed, sword versus sword, as the prince deflected every strike from the elder's massive blade. The prince's sword shattered the old man's weapon during the clash. Realizing what happened, Wu Giant understood. He had been defeated and couldn't accept it. His aura faded away, and then far above, a being, human or not, walked on water and calmly spoke of what had just unfolded. This figure had always desired to grow stronger, endlessly chasing power to surpass all, yet now stood in chains, facing judgment from those who condemned him. Their sentence was exile, he declared bitterly. Wu Jin shouted that he didn't want to be banished, and reached out toward the prince above, who watched in silence. Everyone knew this was a clear victory. Miss Tuli was overjoyed. Supporters of the prince celebrated his win. His father cried, and the monk beside him shed a tear. The father said they were aging. The monk replied, Amitabha, noting the youth's rising strength. All now saw the prince as the greatest swordsman in the 9 abysses. Just then the moon began to crack. None could believe it was real. The third prince looked up at it, realizing it had shattered into countless fragments, which rained down. Miss Tuli caught some pieces in her hands. She sensed her meridians unlocking, an incredibly soothing sensation. It felt far more profound than the prince's healing bath. Grandmother then told Chuli to sit down. Moonlight's true chi gently flowed down, an ideal moment to meditate. Even the prince's father and the monk joined in. All sat quietly, facing the prince, recognizing this was a rare event. But why did the prince appear so weary? What weighed on him? Miss Chuli wondered what was coming next. The prince stood silently, watching it all unfold, then slowly lifted his gaze toward the sky. Everyone saw the moon still above. His father stared and asked aloud, was the moon truly eternal? The prince explained that once martial level 9 peaked, no one could break through further. This was the reason. He returned his sword to its sheath and gently descended. The third prince said he knew many had questions. Master Wu Jian was gone now, and answers would come later. The prince warned that chaos might soon spread, and that would be their next discussion. In the forest, the elder sister heard Jihyo tell her today's battle would reshape universal laws, and she must stay in the city. Thinking over her grandmother's words, she realized this duel between Shenzhen and Wu Giant could truly reshape everything. Walking on, she neared the sea, but discovered it had vanished. From a cliff above the sea, she saw only dry land and sunset. The ocean was gone, leaving a vast desert in its place. At the Shen sect, they awaited updates from branches worldwide. The nearby region had already transformed greatly. A man by the prince heard that black fog had appeared at their border, and most masters sent in never returned. The receding sea had exposed new lands and paths, prompting treasure hunts. Bran Mochi, with them, said the most important thing was to wait. The prince knew the truth and had gathered them to explain it. The prince appeared suddenly, speaking calmly. Everyone was shocked as news had spread quickly. He told them not to worry, he'd explain everything in due time. He began the tale of the Abyss, a secluded realm once isolated from the outside world. The moon had remained sealed, limiting access to its power and preventing any contact with higher levels. Now that the moon had cracked, their world would rise to upper realms, the prince said. Seas had dried and new lands emerged. After this meeting, it was time to explore beyond. The prince's father then asked if his son truly knew where this mysterious place was. The young man replied it lay thousands of meters above, far above the ninth abyss's surface, just a small portion of the greater world. Everyone was stunned by what the third prince revealed. It had never crossed their minds. He said the energy there was far richer. The world above was vast and filled with fierce beasts. He warned masters not to send disciples there unprepared. Master LaRue asked if this outer world was truly that immense. The prince confirmed and said it held far more powerful martial experts than theirs. The prince explained their techniques were basic compared to the upper world. Those warriors fully unlocked their meridians. Even the weakest outsiders had level. The mad scientist asked if such beings could wipe them out easily. The prince replied that outsiders wouldn't strike unless provoked, just as they ignored the weak unless given a reason. Still, the strongest from above might seek him out. Until then, the ninth abyss wouldn't be in danger, the prince said. He told everyone to return to their sects if they wished, or to venture outward. It was up to them. No one had expected the moon to split so soon. The prince warned that fog now clouded the ninth abyss's future. He advised all to stay cautious and self-reliant. Miss Chuli looked like she wanted to speak. Before she could, someone shouted for the moon chatterer to appear. Mr. Lee was shocked. The prince's father jumped, fearing it was the outsiders already arriving. Two unfamiliar figures appeared at the entrance. Sitting calmly, the young man greeted them as Shenzhen and announced they were ambassadors from the outer world, with urgent news for their hero. Everyone was stunned by the messengers. One mocked the cripple who split the moon, calling the place remote. The prince remained silent. The other told him to be quiet before continuing their message. One messenger apologized for his companion's jokes and reassured the group not to be nervous. He noted that, as an outsider heir, the prince must have an interesting lineage. The prince introduced himself as Shenzhen, heir to the sword and a descendant of Shen. Surprised, the young envoy opened a scroll with glowing runes. Reading it, he realized that 300 years ago, Shen Mengtian of the 12th Pavilion was exiled to the nine abysses. That same descendant had now split the moon. The prince closely watched as the scroll glowed around the young man, who asked if he wished to restore the pavilion, or perhaps build a new sect. The prince said nothing, recalling what he'd learned. His grandfather was indeed exiled from the outer world to this hidden realm. The messenger thought the descendant of Shen could join the outer world and gain honors even top disciples couldn't dream of, yet he hadn't chosen to go. The prince replied he'd heard of the 12th Pavilion but wouldn't rely on others. His grandfather left that sect to form the Forgotten Sword sect, and he wouldn't betray those ideals. The envoys were silent, intrigued. Clearly, the young man's stubbornness was why he could split the moon. Holding the scroll, the envoy said, since he founded a sect by the laws of the 8th upper world, he was now a third-order lord, ruling a 1,000-mile territory around his base. Was that clear, Lord Shen? The crowd was stunned. The envoy confirmed, the prince now owned all the surrounding land. The third prince simply thanked the envoy for the clear explanation. The envoy's companion said it was fine, but turning to Brother Zhang, he asked whether this small province was worth their time, tossing the prince a book. The prince caught the book mid-air. It contained knowledge of the 8th higher world and his lineage. After handing it over, the envoys bid farewell and vanished. The second envoy asked not to mind his companion. He introduced himself as Zhang Qingwu from the 8th higher world, hoping they'd become better acquainted, and smiled warmly. The third prince bowed and replied that he shared the same hope. The envoy smiled, asked to take his leave, and vanished. Everyone was left stunned by what they had witnessed. Tearfully, they looked to the prince, wondering what he was thinking. The prince said they should heed Envoy Chang's words. The 9 abysses would be given to the Qi Giant sect. People could stay, join his sect, or leave. He wouldn't stop anyone. Still, to compete with outer world experts, he believed they needed to choose a proper path of cultivation. Due to the Ninth Abyss's limits, they couldn't master immortal realm techniques. The prince said they must seek their own breakthroughs, like standing atop a swaying bamboo stalk. The prince reflected that the Chijin sect was now under his control. Learning the 10,000 bamboo swords would be manageable. But first, everyone had to restore their peak condition. An old man said Amitabha and thanked the prince. But his Chi temple had stood for 1,000 years. He declined to join and asked forgiveness. The prince said it was fine. If the Lan Chi temple didn't wish to join, they could always seek protection from greater temples. The master then announced he would take his leave from the prince. Watching Luo leave, the mad swordsman declared that he too would leave the sect, given how things had unfolded. The mad swordsman departed with Master Leroux. Watching them go, the prince realized the 9 abysses had changed. Not all wanted to join a central power, and forcing them wouldn't win their loyalty. Cooperation was necessary to face what lay ahead. After reflecting, the prince asked the others for their thoughts. Granny Chu declared the Liang sect would join the Chijiang sect. Miss Tuli was shocked, as Granny Chico had just aligned with the prince. Looking at Granny, the prince noted that Madame Kai-ho had long led the Liang sect's training. Now it seemed she trusted him to guide their disciples and teach them divine flame techniques for immortal realm progress. As she left the sect, Master Leroux and the mad scientist walked on. The scientist asked the monk if he was sure. Leroux replied that the Qi Temple's legacy and the energy of the outer world were rich. They could grow slowly, even outside the Qi giant sect. In the 8th higher world, the imperial clan ruled alongside powerful families. Among them, the Pavilion of the 12 Swords and the City of Wind and Thunder were locked in a long-standing blood feud. The conflict lasted centuries. Shen Mountain, heir to the pavilion, met the Thunder family's princess during training. They fell in love instantly, but their opposing bloodlines made their union impossible. The princess eventually returned home. Shen Mountain, unwilling to abandon their love, clashed with his elders. Their rejection pushed him over the edge, resulting in a brutal bloodbath. Enraged, pavilion leader Shen Chunshan exiled his son to the 9 abysses, believing he had risked his clan's lives for a rival family's daughter. Shen Mengtian walked the path of storms into the 9 abysses. There, he founded the Forgotten Sword sect. Reading the book from the envoys, the prince uncovered his ancestors' past. As he closed the book, the prince realized that though powerful, he was still mortal, and the pavilion likely harbored no fondness for his ancestor or those who followed him. Doubt lingered in their hearts. He understood why some hesitated to accept a new cultivation path. They had spent years in their own sects, and weren't sure if joining his was the right move. His father recalled an old text mentioning Shen Chunshan, who'd reached the 8th stage of true body cultivation. Outsiders made progress harder, risking their lives to grow stronger. Holding the map, the prince noted that the pavilion wasn't far, but he doubted they'd travel such a long way just to provoke them without reason. The pavilion lies on a South Sea island. The Forgotten Sword sect is far north. They're separated by tens of thousands of kilometers, so it may be a long time before word reaches the enemy. Miss Chulai, glancing at the book, remarked that it showed they'd be protected after the moon-splitting event. She felt that other factions wouldn't dare attack under such conditions. Her father, hearing this, asked how long the protection would last. She answered, 10 years. She continued reading carefully, examining every detail. Looking off thoughtfully, the prince mused that 10 years would pass quickly. Still, he believed that time might be just enough. The prince believed the moon barrier could be restored in about 10 years. Their strength was nearing its peak, so he reassured everyone not to worry. Some would reach the immortal martial realm in 6 months and begin practicing techniques. The prince said the 10,000 Tibetan swords came from his ancestor, who used outside world methods. He hoped to learn Dan Lo's art, or build his own if needed. Miss Tuli, hearing him, realized he spoke of something immensely difficult. Creating a technique was no small feat, and she shouted in awe at the prince's intellect. His father asked if it was wise to spend so much effort on others' growth. What about his own path? The prince replied it wouldn't take long and urged his father not to worry. Miss Shim still couldn't understand how it wouldn't take long. She was stunned again. This prince constantly amazed her. The prince added that, for Lady Keyhole, divine Tai Chi had deep significance. He pointed to the nearby giant sect on the map. The divine flame was perfect for her and her disciples, and he'd help them obtain it for faster growth. Looking at him, the old woman asked why he provoked them if they'd never clashed. Was it wise to rush this when it involved martial advancement? The prince answered calmly. The Xian sect leader was only at the third true body stage, and even without 3 months of training, he could defeat him. Everyone stared in disbelief. The third true body stage was rare, barely achievable by immortals. Yet the prince spoke of it casually, showing the confidence that once shocked the outer world envoys. Granny Keyhole glanced at the prince, then his father, asking if he was always like this. The father confirmed it, and the holiest woman said she'd grown used to it. The prince looked at the map, lost in thought about how to achieve his goal without brute force. Then he pointed at the girl and asked if she'd start learning sword techniques with him. She was stunned by the sudden offer. Looking at her grandmother, the girl said there was no point. Her sect no longer existed. Granny Kyo noted how everyone focused only on the prince. She turned to her granddaughter and told her to step forward and bow to her new master. The girl knelt and bowed, hitting her head hard on the floor in a clumsy salute. Her forehead swelled and everyone was startled. Watching Miss Chu, the prince thought she was an obedient disciple. Bloody times were coming, and since he couldn't stay long, teaching her served 2 goals at once. Looking at her, he told her to follow. Secluded training would now begin. She rubbed her sore forehead and obediently walked after him. While the prince thought they'd begin secluded training, the girl's mind was elsewhere. She glanced again at her grandmother, who told her to stop staring and hurry up, clearly flustered by her granddaughter's distracted thoughts. Miss Tooley stood in the field, sword in hand, telling her master he swung it 10,000 times daily, practicing sword chi. She didn't get the point and stared blankly at the prince. The prince, sitting nearby, replied that effort always pays off. He told her she was nearly ready for the true body realm. She wondered how he advanced while just sitting and teaching her ball techniques. He explained that when one forms a sword in the heart and devotes their life to it, they merge with it. But she couldn't grasp this and simply imagined forging a sword inside her chest. Overwhelmed, she thought her head might burst. Did she really have to dedicate her whole life to a sword? Instead, she chose to just keep swinging it. After 10,000 swings, her arms trembled with the blade. Exhausted, she could barely hold it, and the sun had already begun to set. Looking at her shaky hands, Miss Tooley felt like they might fall off. She turned to her master and declared she had finished practicing. He didn't even look, just responded calmly. Then she asked what he was doing, noticing him painting again. He replied that he was finishing the final part of the 10,000 Tibetan swords technique. He said his father was close to the 10th level of mortal development, and that this technique could help him. He had forgotten parts of it and was only now writing them out. Surprised, Miss Tooley noted that he had written the whole technique in one night. She hesitantly asked about her grandmother, while trying not to interrupt him. Putting the brush down, the prince assured her that her grandmother was fine and said he'd visit her soon. The prince was annoyed he hadn't finished training yet. He said it would take a few more days, if only they had more herbs. Just then, someone knocked and informed him a merchant from the 8th higher world would arrive tomorrow. He folded the scroll, thinking he should deliver it to his father and prepare. Elder Shen stood before a table filled with jewels, and the merchant asked for his opinion. Everyone agreed the items were impressive. The merchant smiled at Shen's father and said they'd boost his combat power quickly. Shen's father thought the merchant clearly knew his craft, though he didn't understand much himself. He panicked, wondering where his son was. He needed help figuring it all out. The prince entered the hall, greeted the merchant from the outside world, and was warmly welcomed. His father, happy to see him, watched the girl push the prince in his chair as she asked about the strange items and diamonds in front of him. Shen's father told the merchant to greet the prince. The merchant introduced himself as Fu and praised Shen's new sect. He said he had traveled 3,000 miles to show something special to the Lord. The father warned his son that the merchant seemed too eager. Handing him a paper, he asked the prince to check it. The merchant smiled, asking Lord Shen to review it closely. The prince noticed the prices were about 10 to 15% too high. He asked what kind of discount the merchant would give on a bulk order of spirit-tempering pills. The merchant, smiling, replied that the sect had just formed and needed pills to purify their bodies and strengthen their meridians. He glanced at Prince Shen, who now held a pill. He added that the pills were made by the renowned Cube family. If Lord Shen bought over 1,000, he'd waive the delivery fee, charging just 3 gold each. He asked what Shen thought. Smiling while holding the pill, the prince asked about the blood crystals on display. Realizing Shen was no amateur, the merchant assumed he knew their value. Blood crystals are key in talisman crafting and alchemy. The prince smiled, confirming the merchant was right. Spiritual blood comes from slain beasts. Only experts at or above the 8th true body stage can defeat them. Some monsters burn their blood for a power boost. Blood can also be extracted by breaking crystals and dissolving dried blood in jade. Still, blood crystals don't always contain blood. It's all luck. The merchant said if Shen bought all 5,000, the price would be 10,000 gold. Hearing the cost, Shen's father grew uneasy. 10,000 gold was a lot. Shen noted that breaking crystals to extract blood ruins them, meaning no returns. He asked if the price would change if he chose just 100 out of 5. The merchant replied it was Lord Shen's decision, glancing over his glasses, thinking Shen wanted to handpick 100 from the entire batch. Spiritual blood crystals form naturally. Whether a crystal has blood is pure chance. The merchant thought, 100 crystals for 200 gold. Not a bad start. The prince began making his selection. Miss Chulai looked at the prince and asked if he was really planning to inspect every single stone. He sure looked like he was. She was baffled by what he was doing. Watching the scene, the merchant asked if Lord Shen wanted a closer look at the crystals. The prince said no and told his father to give the merchant 200 gold and bring him some empty bottles. His father pointed at himself, confused to be spoken to like a servant. A moment later, the father returned and placed the bottles on the table. The prince thanked him. The prince picked up a stone, cracked it open, and let the blood inside drip straight into the bottle. The merchant, seeing this, said luck was clearly on Lord Shen's side. The prince smiled but looked at him with contempt. Miss Chulai watched as more drops filled the bottles and said the prince was amazing. Stone after stone yielded blood. The merchant stared while the prince kept pouring blood, saying it was just good luck. The merchant was stunned by the steady drip of red into the bottles. He stared at the prince in disbelief. As the prince easily cracked more stones, the merchant turned to him and said he'd become rich. This method of detecting spiritual blood could be worth millions. The merchant was overjoyed, his eyes wild. He said they could become world famous together and begged the prince to work with him. The prince just watched him silently. The merchant thought he'd hit the jackpot. If Lord Shen cooperated, they could buy only blood-filled crystals and sell them at profit, even at discounts. He saw endless gold in his future. As the prince studied the crystals, the merchant said, such talent should know their true value. The sect was new, and with his help, they could rise in the 8th realm. It would benefit them both. Still holding a stone, the prince said the merchant was bold. How did he know it wasn't all a trick? The merchant adjusted his glasses and said he wasn't easily fooled after years in the trade. He was convinced Lord Shen had genuine ability. The prince nodded and thanked him for the compliment. The merchant realized the prince wouldn't reveal everything. He wasn't showing off, and if others learned of this, chaos could follow. The prince smiled and met the merchant's eyes. The merchant understood he didn't want powerful clans. Shen had built his own sect. It showed ambition. But since it was still young, he'd need backing, and likely wanted this partnership. The merchant tried to pressure the prince, saying he was truly impressed. With such talent, Shen could thrive in the higher world. If taught the method, the merchant would take charge of supplying blood crystals to Shen's sect. Shen's father and Mr. Li were stunned by what the merchant was suggesting and offering. The father told Shen their sect could profit greatly, since he now realized how valuable these spiritual crystals were. The prince apologized to his father, explaining the technique was unique to him. Addressing the room, he continued. Turning to the merchant, the prince said he'd once offered to let him supply crystals, but by his estimate, the merchant would be stuck in the deal for 30 years. The merchant called that troublesome. The merchant thought about how binding such a deal would be. In the 8th cultivation realm, top sects and clans spend 30 to 50,000 gold each year on blood crystals. Shen's mention of 30 years seemed impossible. The merchant couldn't grasp what the prince meant. If the merchant used Shen's skill to spot quality crystals, he'd earn far more, and even 50,000 gold would seem minor. Was he misjudging it, he wondered? The merchant then proposed he bring crystals to Shen for sorting and share 30% of the profit. The prince countered, he wanted 50%. He looked directly at the merchant. Shen said he was busy cultivating, so he could only help once every 3 months. Surprised, the merchant did some mental math. 40,000 crystals could yield 1,000 good ones and 100,000 gold. He agreed to the 50-50 split. Pleased with the agreement, Shen asked if it was worth sealing the deal with a few spirit-tempering pills. Smiling, he noted the merchant had 3 void pills he couldn't sell and asked if he'd give them to him. Shen then said he also saw spirit enhancement and sensing pills. Since they had a deal, could the prince get them with the same 50% discount? The merchant frowned. Wasn't 50% generous enough already? He felt he was giving up too much. Still, he told himself to stay calm. Shen was like a high-yield investment, worth betting on. A true merchant sees potential gains. Trust with the prince was the real key to unlocking greater profit. The merchant said he'd still give Lord Shen the pills and other resources. But about the 9 void pills, was Shen second-guessing the deal? Miss Chulai asked if he now wanted to cancel it. The prince replied that he knew the 9 void pills could boost Genkai reserves and help breakthroughs, but only a few could safely use them. The merchant noted their danger. If someone lacked a strong soul or couldn't control vital energy, side effects could severely harm their cultivation. Miss Chulai tensed, ready to fight. Her father stood nearby, while the prince listened calmly. The merchant said they had only recently entered the 8th higher world, so he felt the prince wasn't ready for such a pill. Understanding the merchant's caution, the prince insisted on getting the 9 void pills now. Chulai and her father were shocked by his firm request, especially after all they had just heard. Realizing the prince wasn't to be fooled, the merchant gave up trying to object or bargain. He handed over the pills, admitting he had no leverage. The pills were tightly sealed. The merchant placed them in the prince's hands, warning that only one could be taken every 3 days, and only after the first was fully absorbed. The prince quietly nodded, understanding. Holding the pills, the prince said it was time to leave. He agreed to everything the merchant had explained. The prince called out to Miss Chulai. She snapped out of her thoughts and ran after him as they left the sect together. The merchant stood speechless, unable to grasp what had just unfolded. Shen's father calmly said that his son had always been like this. The merchant turned to him, sensing that was true. In the trade hall, Miss Chulai asked the prince if he truly meant to go through with it. He stared at the pill silently. She reminded him that both he and her grandmother believed in steady, step-by-step growth. The prince returned the pill to its box. Chulai laughed, saying she knew he'd choose the cautious path. She guessed he only asked for the pills now because the clever merchant might raise prices later. Without reacting to her words, the prince suddenly swallowed all 3 pills. Chulai froze in shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The prince told her not to panic and asked her to take him to the osmanthus trees. The results would show in 3 days. Chulai, terrified, repeated that taking all 3 was insane. He remained silent. With tears welling up, Chulai said she trusted him, but begged him to be okay. If not, she would be heartbroken. She looked at him and saw an old man sitting quietly, no longer a youthful boy. He had aged before her eyes. Miss Chulai rushed to gather everyone. The divine healer, the prince's father, and the foreign merchant who sold the pills. She shouted that the prince had swallowed 3 void pills and now looked like an old man. When they arrived, they were shocked to see a gray-haired elder in the chair. The prince had drastically aged. The merchant stared in disbelief. Had the prince truly taken all 3 pills? He had clearly warned to take only 1 per day. The healer said it was too soon to conclude anything and knelt to check the prince's condition. He felt the prince's pulse and told the others that although the meridians were behaving oddly, they were stable. Genchi was protecting them, so his life wasn't in danger. The merchant exclaimed that such control was unthinkable. The pills multiplied energy 9-fold, turning it into wild essence. Even with a strong soul, surviving it was nearly impossible. The healer, still beside the aged prince, admitted it was his first time encountering 9 void pills, and asked the merchant to explain how they affected the meridians. The merchant agreed. Meanwhile, the prince's father and Miss Chulai stood aside, confused but quietly observing. Master Fu said the prince had a small Genchi reserve protecting his heart. It was likely shielding him. Could the prince still be conscious, someone wondered? The healer asked Chulai what her teacher had said before taking the pills. She answered that he claimed results would appear in 3 days. The healer trusted the prince's word. But the merchant doubted him, having seen the state he was in. Still, everyone agreed to wait 3 days as the prince sat silently, eyes shut. During that time, deep changes stirred in his soul, and then the prince finally opened his eyes. Tears welled in Chulai's eyes as she joyfully welcomed the prince back. Lord Shen turned to the merchant and told him to look. The merchant noticed frost forming in the container next to the prince's chair. His body radiated such heat that they had placed ice nearby, and asked merchants to bring more. Chuli casually mentioned that the prince had felt unbearably hot for the past few days. It was quite scary. Realizing what had happened, the prince said he had been careless, and didn't expect to worry everyone this much. Rising calmly from his chair, the prince reassured everyone, saying he'd be more cautious in the future. As Lord Shen stood up effortlessly, everyone noticed his legs moving naturally on their own. Miss Chulai explained to the merchant that channeling Shang-Chi into the legs restores movement. She'd witnessed it before, but not in this case. The prince explained that 9 void pills boost Shang-Chi, reshape the body's energy, cleanse meridians, and enhance the body. He touched his chair fondly, calling it a friend, and said it was time to part. Watching him, the merchant realized that while 9 void pills could purify the body, the risk was high. No average person would dare it. This prince clearly wasn't ordinary. In all his years in the 8th realm, the merchant had met many elites, but none as bold or gifted as this young man. He felt lucky to have come to the Forgotten Sword Sect. The prince stood and told Miss Chulai to pack. They were leaving for Giant Sect immediately. She was surprised, but he reminded her they had to help her grandmother get the divine purple flame and also explore the 8th world. Riding through Xian Sect, Miss Chulai called out to the prince ahead of her, saying it was easy to travel in the 9 abysses since the realm was small. But in the 8th world, she found the distances exhausting. She asked how long their journey would take at this pace. The prince agreed and said next time they should buy bronze leopards. They could run 1,000 miles in a day. But better still would be flying artifacts, if only they could find someone to supply them. He told Chulai that if she reached the 4th level of the true body, she'd be able to fly. The higher her cultivation and energy control, the faster her flight would be. She was shocked and asked more. With such flight ability, they could travel 1,000 miles in half a day. Hearing him speak of flying, Chulai grew excited and wondered when she'd reach the true body's 4th level. The prince explained that while reaching the first 5 levels was manageable, progressing beyond them was far more difficult and would require great effort. This made Chulai realize how special the true body path really was. As they approached the Zion sect, the girl asked if its patriarch had only reached the 3rd layer. Had the prince underestimated how hard the first 5 layers were? He said nothing, continuing silently on horseback. The prince eventually said that if she trained as he advised, she could reach the 4th layer in 6 years, or even sooner. Progress depended on one's mindset and natural talent. He reminded her she had real talent and shouldn't doubt herself. Would he teach just anyone? Hearing this praise, Chulai was stunned but pleased. Before she could reply, he said they had arrived. Above them stretched a sky filled with deep purple clouds. It was the Qian sect. As Chulai gazed at the mountain and the clouds around it, she found it breathtaking. 2 disciples halted them at the gate, asking their names. The prince tossed a letter to the disciples and introduced himself as the patriarch of the Forgotten Sword Sect, asking to meet their own patriarch and to deliver a message from Shenzhen. One disciple caught the letter, listened, and told them to wait while he delivered it. They waited at the temple base, facing many stairs. As the sun set, Chulai asked how long they'd wait and if they'd have to sleep outdoors. Looking up at the sky, the prince assured her it wouldn't take long and said he'd dismount first. Moments later, a disciple approached Chulai and told her the patriarch was ready to receive them. She dismounted and glanced toward the prince. The prince thanked them, and the disciples pointed out where they could stable the horses. One disciple guided the prince, saying the staircase might look steep, but was easy to climb. Chulai remarked the place felt familiar. The guard explained the sect had existed for over 1,000 years. Many great cultivators had climbed those steps. Their tournaments were once famous, even 500 years ago. Curious, the prince asked when the last tournament happened. The disciple was surprised he knew of it. He explained that after their founder vanished, the sect declined. The final tournament was 480 years ago. The prince looked ahead, and Chulai realized he already knew that fact. He replied that knowing more than needed can be quite useful. They began ascending the stairs together. The disciple pointed at the violet clouds, saying they were remnants left by the sect's founder. Lord Shen explained. 400 years ago, during the sect's last tournament, 2 rivals fought to the death. Xian Ming won using his ultimate move, creating a purple mist that colored the sky. He vanished, but the clouds remain. The disciple replied that Lord Shen clearly knew. Without the founder's purple clouds and hidden mountain treasures, their sect wouldn't still exist. Many tried to seize them, but the mines were nearly depleted, so interest faded. As they finished climbing the stairs, Chulai fell behind. The disciple stepped aside, inviting Lord Shen to proceed. Miss Chulai asked the prince to look at something she pointed to. He followed her gaze to a worn, crumbling statue, covered in weeds and missing its head from long neglect. While sipping tea, a disciple informed the vice-patriarch that Lord Shen from the Forgotten Ball sect had arrived to meet her sect's leader. She glanced at him and instantly recognized him. The disciple escorting them confirmed it. Just months ago, he split the moon and entered the eighth world. Now his sect held equal status to theirs. The girl stared at him and dismissed the disciple, who bowed and exited. Rising from her seat, she introduced herself as Bei Wu Kai, the vice-patriarch. Their patriarch was currently in seclusion and couldn't be disturbed, but she welcomed them, curious to meet the youth who split the moon. She said splitting the moon so young was impressive, but this was still just the 9 abysses. While the master responded, Chulai sensed from his tone that he had some hidden plan again, which worried her, as they were guests on unfamiliar ground. Wanting to help, Chulai respectfully bowed and said it was an honor to meet Vice-Patriarch Bei. Laughing, the Vice-Patriarch said there was no need for such formality, and told her not to worry, they weren't that intimidating. Though not the strongest sect, Xian would assist if asked. Chulai thought the Vice-Patriarch seemed nicer than she'd expected. That gave her hope. Perhaps things could go well if they were respectful. Then the prince spoke up, saying he'd heard Xian's sect had a divine purple flame technique, and asked directly if he could obtain it. Chulai was shocked by his bluntness. The Vice-Patriarch paused, then asked if he even understood what he'd just asked for. The prince replied that he came prepared, offering compensation and a gift in exchange for the divine purple flame technique. The Vice-Patriarch burst out, scolding him. That technique was forbidden, passed only within the sect. She called him insane to believe he could obtain it. He calmly responded that his offer matched its worth and included an alliance. Furious, she ordered him to stop talking, calling him arrogant and foolish. No one had ever made such a ridiculous request. The prince asked if she was deciding alone or if she needed to consult the patriarch about it. She snapped back, saying weak techniques from the 9th abyss couldn't compare. Stepping closer, she asked if he felt no shame. She told him to go home and learn respect, then ordered they be escorted out, saying people like them weren't welcome in the sect. Miss Chulai was confused. Things had escalated fast, and the vice-patriarch was clearly furious. The prince noted it was odd for someone in her position to lose control so easily. Just then a disciple approached, apologizing for the vice-patriarch's harshness. He explained she had a difficult nature, and that the divine flame was their core technique, not something easily given away. The prince said the matter was important and hoped to speak with the patriarch directly. Since the vice-patriarch didn't let him finish, the disciple replied that he would inform her. But since the patriarch was in seclusion, Madame Bei handled all matters for now. The prince thanked him. Meanwhile, the vice-patriarch sat at her desk when a knock came. She asked what it was, and the disciple said the prince had an urgent request to meet the patriarch.